Howdy, friends. It's Time Theft Today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Time Theft Today.
Uh, we renamed the show. It's season 2 of this show, and
Yes,
now we're
we're
called
back.
Time Theft Today. Um,
Yes.
just to explain the idea of the name, I'm curious what people think. Um, it's basically the idea. This is like a talk show, right? Um,
hmm
thank you, Liv. I thank you so much. They actually helped come up with the name a little bit too. Uh,
Oh, cool.
uh,
It's a
and
really good name.
I'm very
I
pleased.
really like it.
It basically the idea is we're like a talk show, and yeah, and it happened. And talk shows are usually named after the time slot that they're in, like Good Morning America or Late Night a Night with Jon Stewart or whatever the fuck. And our time slot is for most people it seems is time theft time. It's when you're
hmm
supposed to be working. You should watch this show. Uh,
hmm
uh
We've heard that from lots of people watching the show that they watch it while they're at work, and they, in the spirit of laziness does not exist, and everything we talk about,
yeah,
you're hitting to bricks mentally
yeah,
from your
absolutely.
job.
Hit the bricks, pal. You're done.
Um, so yeah, so we're very proud of that fact. Um,
hmm
so it's Saturday here. That's
Damn.
fucked up to
Y'all
my
are in the
brain.
future.
That's fucked up.
That's so fucked up. You're on the edge of the earth.
um, but yeah, so yeah, it's Time Theft Today. We're Time Theft Today with Dr. Devin Price and Madeline Test Device, because that's my last name. Is my
Yes.
username. Like John
Cowboy
Halo.
Bebop at, at his computer.
Oh, thank
and
you,
and you know,
thank you so much for. I know people come to the show at like. Thank you so much for coming during weird times too. We love this.
yes. Plus, so many people here work, just so many people in general work all kinds of weird hours because they work in food service or all kinds of different things, and live all across the globe. So the convenient thing about the Time Theft Today title is really any time of day that we do it, somebody could be watching it while they're at work.
Or the
And
VOD and the VOD too.
or the VOD. And so this is a show all about neurodiversity, queer issues, internet culture, current events, all of that kind of shit, that you can use to have a little brief respite from your work day or your tasks around the house,
Yeah.
to just, get a little, have a little fun with it.
And we're keeping the space theme. I actually have some big plans for who knows when my disability and brain will let me do work. But I'm gonna start to redesign things. But I will like the space theme because most talk shows happen, they're themed around like the city they're in. I feel like like they always have the like city backdrop. Hell yeah! Thank you, Megan. Megan's doing some time theft. Hell yeah.
Yes. We love
S-
that.
so that's what we need to do every time we start the show. We need to sound out off in
Ask
the
who's doing time theft.
yes.
Yes.
Oh
What
yeah.
job are you not doing right now? Everybody, what job are you not doing?
Yes. Sound off in the chat. What job are you stealing time from? Uh, if you're on the VOD on YouTube, put it in the comments. Uh, I am
Yes.
not software testing for the government. Hell yeah, time theft from the government.
Yes. I
But yeah,
love to hear it.
we're our show. It doesn't come from a specific city. It comes from cyberspace. Is where our
Mhm.
show is. Not managing a lab. Purple
Fuck
Leader 2
yeah.
is also hell yeah. We got so
Also
many.
not doing that. Yeah. I'm
Not
not
int-
interning for OSU. Oh wow, Skelly. Is that Ohio State OSU or a different OSU?
you're you're time thefting the
The
government.
government.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or just
Extinac.
even if you're not on unemployment, we believe in you. It's all time theft. You're time
Oh my
thefting
god.
the job you should have.
Yes, bad Buckeyes are the only Buckeyes. Oh, yeah, fuck yeah, Skeletori. As a former, I guess, Buckeye. I guess.
Oh, I'm so proud of us. We're doing so much time theft. Uh,
Yeah. Tisco Spectrum 4 said, I am not pulling credit reports. Hell yes. Never do that.
hell yeah. Oh, we love it.
Yes.
Oh, it's really good. So so yeah, that's the new name of the show. It's the same show. It might continue to do a little look a little different. I'm very proud of the little logo thing that I made. It's just gifs that I I found a gif of
Yeah.
somebody taking bags out of a safe and then put clocks over it. And
That
also
one's really good.
and then also um I found this guy.
Oh my
This little
God.
clock guy.
Oh, we got to give him a name.
I think he needs to be our new
He's our
like
mascot.
mascot. Like I found so many of
Absolutely.
these gifts and they were just randomly on gift cities. So I don't know where they're from. Um but he's our little mascot now, I think. Uh
Yes.
he's who you're stealing time from. He's Clocky.
Clocky. He's Clocky. Oh my God. That's right. That's his name. Clocky the time theft boy.
Uh,
He's industrious and lazy. He's tucking you in for a nap. He's falling to hell. He's Clocky. We love him.
So please send us if anybody has more of these or knows where this guy comes from. I think I do. I think I do. He likes it when you steal from him. It's fine.
Yeah. It's all in good fun.
So yeah, I will have to find out where this guy's from. I don't know where these gifts come from. Like how did GeoCities people find these gifts? Was it just like they saw a GIF on another website and just took it, or was there like were they going to like GIF uh websites? I did find there was this really interesting video. I meant to post it in the Discord. And I'll post it in this chat now because I thought it was so interesting. You know the little skeleton that goes doot doot, the doot doot
Mm-hmm.
skeleton.
Yes.
Somebody did a video about they found where that came from, which was really
Oh,
interesting.
I've seen what? Where's he from again?
So a lot of people think that he's from Windows Movie Maker 3D, which is a program some you may have heard of it. I know Germa played with it once. People have played with it before. Um, and yeah, a lot of people would say that it was from that. Um, but that's not true. That is not true. And so I won't spoil the ending because it's an interesting little story. Very much from the GeoCities era for sure. So it's a really interesting story. It's no one knows who created Skull Trumpet parentheses until now by Jeffiet on
Mm,
YouTube. A really interesting little story, but
wow, it's like the Roblox Oof saga
absolutely, it's a little
kind of thing.
mini. It's a little mini of that. Um, oh my God, he's checking his own watch.
Oh my God. This is like
Oh.
when a barbecue place has like a pig eating itself as a logo. Wow, this one's really good.
Yeah, that one's so. Where'd you find this one? It's so
This is
crisp.
yeah. We should use this one like when this is like, when you're doing stand up, they give you a 5, like a little signal. Like you should do this when I'm info dumping too long or like I'm explaining something really obvious for like a really long time. Like
This,
wrap it up.
yeah, I think we're gonna steal the. I've been a little nervous to steal stuff and put them in our emojis. I think this needs to be an emoji for sure. So that when we take a long time to start the show, people can post this. Or if one
Yes.
of us is
Yeah.
dumping for too long.
Yes. Have
Bitchy
have
little
the
foot tap.
viewers turn on us. Oh my God.
Oh. Yeah, the
That one's
mustache is
really
so
good.
good. I feel like it. What is clock in French? I feel like it needs
Yeah.
to. So anyway, that's the scoop with time theft today. I really want to redo this the visuals for this show. Not a ton. I like what we have here, but to make it look like an actual website, and I want to add more gifs. Honestly, I haven't changed up the gifs in this setup very well. So if anyone wants to, I love giftcities.org. If people want to send me submissions for gifts to go into the to be on the show, I would love that. If people want to send me websites that are like space themed that for inspiration, I would love that. As I do some redecorating around here, there's no under construction gifts on our hold screen, which is seems like a shame. Um, so anyway, that's the new name. That's kind of the vibe. It's the same show, but different name.
Yes. Yeah. Just because we were, it was kind of a seat of the pants venture, building the ship as we flew it. Well, you were building the ship. Uh, and so, we wanted to have a just really demarcate it as this, creative partnership and thing that we do every week that, just have a name for it. Because I know a lot of people do consume it like a podcast. They watch the VODs and think of it like that. And it is, I think the talk show formulation is totally
Yeah.
what this thing is. So yeah, yeah, it's nice that we have a name for it and a concept. Um,
Yep.
yeah.
I'm trying to get on Shindig's Twitter. If you've been following Shindig on Twitter, they've been posting a bunch of really cool video VTubers that are doing really cool things on Twitch. So, um, but yeah, speaking of the where this show and this channel is headed, Devin is starting a new venture. Devin has been forced by a bet to start a new venture.
Yes. Yes. Well, you're in it too now.
I
So
am in it
so
too.
it's
I
yeah.
I'm really enjoying it. Devin lost a bet and has to watch the first 130 episodes of One Piece.
hmm Yes. My friend Jessica played all of Disco Elysium for me, and she said that the equivalent exchange for that is me watching 130 episodes of One Piece. So we did a stream, and we a couple of nights ago, Wednesday night I think, watching the first 4 episodes, and we actually really liked it more than we expected.
Yeah,
So episodes are about like 20-22 minutes. It is a lot.
it's like
I'm
40 hours, right?
Yeah, it works out to about 40 hours. Yeah.
Which is
Or like,
almost is
yeah.
roughly what we've done on this show in the past year.
Yeah, which is crazy. So it's a job. So in the spirit of time theft,
Yeah.
um, gonna watch all of One Piece on the stream. So I had to build my own stream assets that are very ugly compared to this, and you know,
They're
so
amazing.
watch this space for that too.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure I pointed it out on this show, especially for people who watch the VODs on YouTube. We love you. Keep doing that. Um, but we are not going to put full episodes of One Piece on YouTube. so
That we'll get in trouble for that
so
for sure.
but as of right now, as of streaming this, the first VOD is still up on Twitch. So you can
Yes.
go watch us watch the first 4 episodes of One Piece on Twitch. Those will not come to YouTube, so I wanted to make sure people were aware of them. And they could disappear at any
Yes.
time, so get in there while
Yeah.
you can.
It seems like Twitch doesn't care though, because there is a channel that just streams One Piece episodes 24/7.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, like, and lots of anime channels like that on Twitch exist. So it seems like for now, at least Twitch is not really asked at all by that. So
Yeah, and if you're not watching
we
things
have
on the
magic going.
YouTube, consider following us on YouTube. I do occasionally edit the VODs, not very often. Would like to do that more, but those edits will be uh on
Oh,
YouTube
this little
only.
pervert. Hey, we
Yeah.
got some links over here. Hey, you want to watch some VODs?
I found him when I was
Nice.
when I searched thief, and I was like, yes, we got to have a whole thief based aesthetic now.
Hmm. That's true. That also fits with the scammer spirit. Yeah, like on multiple
Yeah.
levels.
Oh
Like,
my. Yeah.
it's an
So
anti-work, pro-theft
be gay, do
stream.
crime.
Literally.
um.
Oh, love to see it. It's all
Uh.
good.
Awesome. Selected the
So
time theft
yeah.
stream notification from among all my team's notifications. Fuck yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
You got your priorities in the right place, Osric. Oh,
Watch House
good shit.
MD a bunch on pirate Twitch channels. It's very funny.
Oh
Guys,
my
I gotta
god.
here's another thing. I gotta do a stream where I teach everybody to pirate shit. Because
Yes, that's on our list.
for the love of God, torrent things.
As we were watching One Piece on, an illegal streaming website, I was like, "I'm pirating," and she was like, "No, you're not.
You're not.
That's literally not pirate.
I mean, technically, maybe, but come on. Our
I'm not
forefathers,
contributing."
who fucking created Pirate Bay. You're not on there with your fucking, you're not seeding the
I'm not
torrents.
seeding. I'm not giving back. I'm truly leeching off of the real pirates. I mean, I used to download things, and then I downloaded a copy of Rihanna's SNM where the cover art was a lawyer, and then I had to pay a $100 fine to Loyola University Chicago for violating the RIAA Act or
Really?
whatever. Yeah, so then I stopped pirating
Wow.
in that way. You
I've
know,
never heard of anyone ever actually having to pay.
it was
Anyone
because
I
I was
knew.
using university Wi-Fi, so they
Like, yeah.
dumb, dumb move on my part.
Oh.
Anyway,
So
yes, but
anyway,
we will have a piracy stream.
and if you have suggestions for that, because I am not actually an expert on that. So if people have, where do you torrent? What do you use? Let me know for that eventual stream. Um,
Absolutely.
but anyway, let's move on to um the main event.
Yes. So this stream today is inspired by some actually really good quality, delicious piss course that has been happening on Tumblr starting in December about the idea of it's often summarized as like white people have no culture, Americans have no culture, and we'll get into this, but it's actually a lot broader than that. It's definitely certainly not just a white or just an American phenomenon, but this conversation that comes up a lot about the void left behind by imperialism, capitalism, and whiteness as a cultural force, right? Like hegemonic whiteness,
Right.
not being white. How these things kind of strip away at cultural ties and leave people kind of with this hole in their lives that feels like they don't have a culture. You do still have a culture. It's a culture of destroying culture is kind of how I would put it. But there's a lot of cool different takes on it. And there was just this really long Tumblr thread with a lot of different perspectives on it, kind of going back and forth about, oh, white people don't have a culture. Yes, they do. Here's how it's so normalized you don't see it because it's the culture depicted in media. Back and forth. And it's very rare that every person in a discourse online is making a understandable, valid point. And I feel like this is the case with this one. And I waded into a little bit and got some good responses there too. So we're gonna talk about it. We have some questions that one Tumblr user put together about how do you, if you feel like you have no culture, how do you identify what your culture is? And what do those answers to those questions have to tell you? So we'll go through, and some people have already given responses to those questions, but we'll go through those questions today and people can kind of
Yeah.
react and share in the chat.
Thank you so much. I'll specifically call out Quarian, uh, Vivian, Bobeebs, and Photo all gave us full answers in the Discord in the submissions. which I read through. I really appreciated all of that stuff. It was really interesting to see, especially because we had a few. Um, it was really interesting because uh, um, Corian talked about um, right. I'm making sure that I am getting the right person with the right things. Um, yeah, Corian talked about being Jewish and
Mhm,
like celebrating Shabbat and stuff like that. And we'll get into some of these answers more. And um, Bobeeb's talked about ethnically Japanese and but having spent much of their formative years in the U.S. Which so those were some really interesting sort of like outside of whiteness in some respect to because I think that that's what's so interesting about this conversation is um like how you answered from being very much inside this like American white kind of monoculture thing
mhm,
and I think I have a few answers that are a little bit different than yours but barely um
mhm,
and so it's really interesting to hear people talk like from both sides of like the conversation of like from being within and without this sort of like whiteness and what that means and all that stuff was it was really cool to hear all that stuff as well as the other
yeah,
answers that we got so thank you so much
yes,
for
and I
doing
got a
that.
few I got a few other asks too from people who have their life experiences are just like a lot of intersections between different cultures and countries where they've lived. And so there's like lots of cool perspectives on it to delve into. And I'm sure lots of people who are here in the chat also, as we go through some of these questions in a little bit, you'll have your own answers to share and a lot of cool discussion will come from it. Um,
Yeah, please
and
please be we're going to go through those questions at some point and please let us know as well.
Right. Yeah, and I'll say that another big influence for me in talking about this stuff the way that I do is having had multiple long-term relationships with Mexican people who are racialized, right? So who are not white or white passing, but who have a lot of the exact same kinds of complaints and feelings of alienation that a lot of white people do, a feeling like, oh, I just, I was just raised with just kind of, for the most part, like the American norms and I want to reconnect to something that'll give me some sense of cultural grounding. But what do I have to reach to? What do I actually have access to? What is legitimate and what is pantomiming? And a lot of the things that people reach back for even are like, okay, I'm going to learn Spanish. And that's still a language of like an imperial power, right? A white imperial power. So
Right.
like I think a lot of different cultures have a lot of the same struggles of if you assimilate in the US or you're forcibly assimilated, you no longer have any connection to anything that feels authentic. And so there's this search for authenticity um, that is very easily like marketed to in a lot of weird ways, or there's lots of things that get offered to you to try and fill that void that aren't actually like building like community ties or like sustaining familial ties or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Um, lots of different cool things to be said. Hello, Chicago. Yes, yeah, forcible assimilated Native Mexican here. Exactly. Yeah, like yeah. So there's so much trauma involved in a lot of that stuff, and even when we just talk about racial assimilation or ethnic assimilation, there's so many different forms that that takes and consequences that that has, and people understanding what their culture is or who they are and stuff like that. So yeah, glad to have you here for this conversation. Um, so yeah, so we will get to some of the questions about like how do you unpack what your culture is, but I guess we probably should just start with the initial Tumblr discussion, right?
Yeah,
Probably.
absolutely.
Cool. Right. Um, oops. There we go. Okay, so it looks like the person who started this thread off has now since deactivated. So that's always, something happened here.
Yeah. I think that was true when you first messaged me about this conversation too. So I hope I
Okay.
I hope they didn't get dogpiled too much.
Yeah. I don't know if they did. It might have just been Tumblr notification hell or what, but I think they were still
Yeah.
active in December and now they're not. So something happened.
Touching the
Um
ground.
yeah.
Just piss course happened here.
The most annoying bitches have been here.
No, actually not touching the ground, sniffing the ground. Like
Mm, tasting the dirt.
piss has been here.
Um
There's been piss here.
mm. So Chamas says, sure, cultural appropriation is bad and all, but why are we pretending that white Americans consulting their genetic ancestry profiles to determine which European cultural aesthetics they should adopt isn't also weird? Um, so I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Like it's cringy and weird when uh, white people make some other culture that they don't really have ties to their identity in this fake ass way, but it's also weird when they're like, oh, my great 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 grandmother was Estonian or whatever, and therefore I'm gonna wear, like
when
it
they
gets weird
when they
fashy.
pull a fucking Elizabeth Warren or whatever.
Right, but with European shit.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think this brings up a good point that kind of um gets tangented off of here, um, which is probably worth talking about to some degree, is appropriation.
Hmm.
Like I don't know. It's a big part of this conversation that I feel like the conversation kind of like moves in a different direction away from. But it's a difficult question, and I don't know that I have a good sense of the bounds of cultural appropriation, and like I don't know, and it's a tricky thing because I think it's not well like it's it can be a little amorphous
I think
sometimes.
so.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that people want to put things in these boxes of like, well, this is cultural appropriation and this isn't, or and again, it's so the discussion is so like molded by bad actors with conservatives um, arguing about cultural appropriation and bad faith, but um,
Hmm.
I definitely think it's an important thing to talk about. And it's but even if it's hard to talk about because of the way that the conversation has been molded by conservatives and some amount of people on the left acting bad faith as well, I would say. Although obviously the conservative discourse is a lot worse and a lot bigger of a problem.
Yeah, and I feel like I learned a lot about how I think about appropriation or how better to think about it just from having this particular conversation and some of the messages that I got from people. I think one thing that might be important to tease apart is appropriation as this economic exploitation of a culture or of a group of people versus smaller scale individual things that one person from Australia sent me a message about this idea called cultural cringe. That's something that is not necessarily violent or destructive, but it is kind of like, well, it doesn't sound like you actually know this culture like you think you do, and it doesn't feel genuine for you to be claiming it. And that's kind of uncomfortable. And that's not great, but it's not necessarily the same level of violence and exploitation and taking credit for something a culture has done that we see, nation states doing or things like that.
Right.
Um, and I think also, and some of the comments will get into this, um, like in an attempt to push back against appropriation happening, sometimes people have, especially white people who think they're doing the right thing or trying to do the right thing or trying to feel like they're doing the right thing, kind of
Right.
end up reifying these lines of like, you can't practice this culture if you're not of this racial group or if you didn't always live in this place. And that's not how those things work, right? Like culture is always changing and evolving.
Right.
so the idea of returning to some culture from the past is always going to be kind of have its limits, especially when it's somebody from an imperial group trying to do that. Um, but that
I
also means that like you're shaped by where you are and what you participate in, and that means that there are cultures that can become a place where you belong because you've contributed to it and participated in it.
Yeah, I think that this maybe is an oversimplification, but I did like this friendly reminder that you don't get to celebrate Lunar New Year unless you're literally from a country that does, or if you're invited by someone who is from a country that does. And somebody replied, "Friendly reminder that I hereby formally invite everyone to celebrate New Year." Which,
Mhm.
like, I think that's like an oversimplification. Like, I think this, like, and clearly that's even like a white person saying that, right? Like, you don't get to
Right.
make those sweeping generalizations, but it, I think it can come from bad faith, and maybe it is cringe if somebody does that. Like, I think that's an interesting sort of idea, because it's like, well, cringe isn't harm, right?
Right.
Like, that's not, it's, I mean, that's fine.
Right. Yeah. Um, and there's also a difference between pointing out like the double standard of like, oh, if a white person uses this language, they will not be penalized. Um, that doesn't necessarily always map onto the white person shouldn't use that language. It's often they should be really aware of those double standards and make sure they're prepared to defend any black person who uses that same language and gets penalized for it, right? Like,
Right.
and it depends on what we're talking about here a lot, but there's a lot of gradients to it
Yeah.
for sure. Um, so yeah,
I think there's going to be a lot
uh,
of good discussion in here, so forgive us if we're silent. We are reading the chat because there's a lot of good discussion. So I want to make sure we give ourselves
yeah,
a lot of space to just read the chat, because I bet there's going to be a lot.
yes. One thing Male Valence said is one thing that bothers me is that the concept of cultural appropriation will scare people away from having authentic cultural exchanges with people from other cultures. Not interacting with people from other cultures won't help fight racism.
Yeah.
Yes. This is something that I know several indigenous people who make beaded, earrings, regalia, things like that, and they sell the things that they sell to a general audience are things that are completely acceptable for anybody to wear. Anybody can wear a beaded earring that was made and sold by an indigenous maker. That's not the same thing as like regalia that's like for a specific purpose or something.
Right.
But a lot of people are afraid to buy it or wear it because they're afraid it's going to look like appropriation. When it's like, again, we got to move past how things are going to look to other white people here. Like supporting an indigenous person and maintaining their crafts and like wearing that art is a good is a great thing to do. You know,
Yeah.
um, and I think also like one thing that happens is if you have too much cultural ignorance, you don't know what's really sacred and important to a culture versus what's just something
Yeah.
a thing people do,
Yep.
and it's not a big deal.
And I think that our ideas of what is normal to, like, I think about, it's hard to describe because I don't know a ton about it, but I do know there's a cultural thing that is sometimes described as a cryptid in like American cultures, that is a like really serious um, spiritual like thing for, I believe, maybe a number of Native American cultures, and it's hard because you're literally not supposed to talk about it, like, and
Right.
it's just this thing that's like in horror games and shit, and it's like we don't need to. Like, a lot of the aesthetics of that thing are actually like the things. If you want to play with that stuff, you don't need to fucking have it be related to the like the native myths. Like, a lot of the
Hmm.
iconography you can just fucking call something else, because our iconography of it is not actually have anything to do with the native myths, and it's like,
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect example of like knowing what's actually sacred and how to handle that respectfully. Like, and
right.
it's just really anathema to a lot of just like white American people that like, oh, there's something I can't even talk about. There's things that I'm not supposed to know about. Like,
Right. Whereas
Not
from everything
me.
I know, I think it's totally cool to fuck with yokai, like Japanese
Mhm,
monsters and like that kind of stuff, because it's like that from I could be wrong. I'm very much a white person, but from everything I know, it's like, yeah, that shit is all just like fun shit that they remix, and it's in every anime to like have yokai and to use those traditions. So yeah, fuck with that shit. Just like know what it is, and be aware that Orientalism is a thing, and but that's
mhm.
um
Uh, Cassie Goes Queerly has a good message in the chat. Here in Aotearoa, please let me know if how to pronounce that. White people often
is
have
that
more options for.
is that New Zealand, the
I
correct
believe,
name for
I
New
believe
Zealand?
so.
I feel like
Yeah,
that's come up before.
yeah. White people often have more options for learning Te Reo Maori, the language of the indigenous people, due to racism and colonization. Lots of conversations to be had about who gets access to that cultural treasure and why. It's not white people shouldn't learn it. It's white people need to remember that their classmates are dealing with massive historical trauma while you're just having a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad people are appreciating the conversation in the chat.
Aute Aotearoa.
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 Aotearoa. Okay. Here in
Thank you.
Aotearoa. Great, great. Thank you. Um, yeah. So, moving on to the next
Bit.
layer of Chama's discourse, um, kind of just clarifying more. The implication that a connection to authentic tradition is an innate part of people's hierarchy of needs is actually really disturbing. The valorization of DNA or racial heritage as the true arbiter of what you can and should regard as profound. My cheek swab says I can reclaim Odin. Barf. Um, yeah. Uh, so, Maddie, have you ever known somebody like this? Somebody who's like, oh, I'm like in real life, who's like, oh, I'm trying to like get in touch with my like Norse or like whatever, Italian, whatever it is, kind of like European culture, and they like start doing a European cosplay.
No. I don't think I've actually met someone like that I can think of. Um but yeah, it's definitely a thing. And we get into I think Irish culture is a really interesting one that somebody replies to later on that we'll talk about. But yeah, have you met people like this personally?
Um, you see a little bit of it when like in 2020 I was doing a lot of like one of my pandemic hobbies was like genealogy stuff because
Oh yeah.
an uncle sent me a bunch of old photos and all this stuff that like I had not seen in years because they went fucked off to England with it. Um, and so on those forums, you'll sometimes see people like that. And you'll definitely see people doing weird shit with DNA on the genealogy forums. Lots of people are like, oh, I'm, 2% Native American. And so
They're
now I'm,
reinventing what is the shit blood quantum like
yeah, they're doing a blood quantum, and they do that with having African ancestry. They do it with like various European identities. But more common than not, if they do a test and it's more European than they thought, they're like, oh, it's so boring. I'm sad, like, which
yeah,
is really fucked up. So yeah.
very bizarre to me. I had a Scottish grandfather, and my family made sure I had a Scottish name for the sake of a man who was not good to our family and ultimately left him. Yeah. uh,
Yeah,
did this with
that's also.
did
Oh,
this
sorry,
with
go ahead.
Gav says did this with Italian culture and college cringe. That see, I feel like
Anyone can appropriate Italian culture. I do it. I'm not Italian,
I
but
don't
I'm
know why
Italian
it's so
coded.
funny to me. It really shouldn't be. I shouldn't have these double standards, but
It's
it's really
funny.
funny.
It's it's fucking and yeah, I definitely knew the people that would do like the German dancing cultural club thing. And some of that stuff it was like they actually had a grandma, like they had some connection to it or whatever. But like sometimes people just LARP it a little bit. And again, it's maybe cringe, but it's not, it's whatever. Um and Husifer is talking a little bit in the chat about like having some tie to a relative when the relative was kind of a shitty person, and that is also, I feel like, such a complicated thing for people who are trying to reconnect.
Yeah. Yeah.
When there's generational stuff, I've heard that
I
story a lot and relate to
yeah, I
that.
think that there's a big conversation, and I think we'll probably get more into it when we like start going through the questions. That
Hmm.
because that's definitely a big part of my story. Is like, I'm really disconnected from my uh extended family, and I think that that's more common, and that's yeah a big part of the conversation that I think we'll get more into.
Hmm.
Cassie goes
Absolutely.
clearly says comes back to we white people, U.S. Westerners, are very, very bad at understanding differences between individual and systematic. Um, one in and I think that's very true. There's a big difference between like we're talking about with the Lunar New Year thing, just as an example. Like it's very different for somebody to celebrate New Year, some white person to celebrate Lunar New Year, and somebody to start making like moon cakes or whatever as a white person and taking over that business and that economy. Um,
Hmm.
and it really comes back. I mean, again, it's we live in a society. It's a big part of capitalism because a lot of this stuff it wouldn't matter if it wasn't like you're literally taking people's like jobs. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
that's a big
yeah.
part of this.
And the power dynamic. So, like, an example that comes to mind to me is like, okay, if you were a single person moving to Palestine and you lived there for years, learned how to cook a lot of food that's commonly made and prepared in the region, you know, uh, bought olive oil made from the olive trees there. That's very different from the Israeli government settling, forcibly displacing people, and then saying Israeli food is this Middle Eastern food that Palestinian people have always eaten, which is what they do. Like the power, it's all about the power being
Yep.
enforced.
Absolutely.
Which,
And I think that's what's so hard. I think that is a huge part of the conversation because it is the crux of the conservative bad faith reading of all of this stuff. Like not just conversations about um appropriation, but conversations about literally any bullshit conservative thing that they want to talk about is it's like, well, replace black people in this sentence with white people and suddenly it's racist. And it's like,
it's like, okay,
yes.
replace my hand with a gun. Like,
Yeah, like what if the world was made of pudding? Like it's not that's not
right.
white people and black people experience different shit in society. We have
Yeah.
different fucking places. And it's like, yes, you
Yeah.
can point to exceptions, but we're talking about systematic shit. We're not talking about fucking individual shit. Um so yeah,
Yeah.
that really, and I think it's hard because it's this thing where it's like there are multiple conversations around all this stuff. It's like this is the conversation that we're having, the more global not global, but like bigger conversation that like people on the left are having with people on the right, and it's like those conversations are like so not actually like they're so bent by the bad faith reading of right wingers, but so there's multiple conversations that happen around this stuff, and it's more important to you know not be fighting bad faith fights. And
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, Chama's next little point here. Also uncomfortable how people will claim they want to reclaim the culture of their ancestors, but insist that the culture of the last 1,000+ years that their ancestors actually practiced doesn't count because it's Christian. And the piecemeal Frankenstein of alleged pre-Christian beliefs and mystical Victorian racism that their actual ancestors may have had nothing to do with is far more appealing. So that's the like, oh, I'm trying to get back in touch with my Norse or my like Celtic mysticism, whatever, treating culture as this like pure thing locked in the past, or just picking and choosing as is convenient or appealing to you based on like aesthetics or whatever,
yeah,
ra- rather than seeing culture as something constantly changing and moving. if you're Irish American, that's Irish American culture. That's very different from Irish culture or Celtic, whatever, something thousands of years ago. Um, so all of this up to this point has been one poster, Chalmers, just kind of saying like these are a lot of kind of obnoxious things people do that really exotify and other cultures or even cultures of the past. And it's a really weird understanding of like authenticity. Um, so now we have this contribution from Kohlrabi Sabi, who says, not sure if we're talking about the same thing, but for some, it's about trying to depart from homogenous white culture and by association, fascism. Like my choices as a fifth generation white person are one, no cultural identity, two, cultural appropriation, or three, gleaning the family tree for a crumb of authentic personal identity.
Yeah.
Um, and this is kind of similar to something Husifer66 said in the chat. The instinct to cling to some invisible, faraway thing as opposed to celebrating the cultures in your community that can enrich your life is hard for me to understand. Um, and I think that's just something we'll come back to, I think, time and time again,
Mm-hmm.
that there are ways to kind of like find this meaning outside of this.
Right.
Um, and Chalmers replies, what's more authentic than a personal identity that's based on the life you actually live? I think there is something very ironic about trying to renounce fascism by clinging to the crumbs of a European racial inheritance, especially one that's reverse engineered from mythologized elements and assumptions about tradition, rather than the actual cultural elements that get passed down over the generations. Yusufer said that line is exactly what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes. And this I think is like kind of part of the like dialectic that we'll get into. Like,
Right.
um, it's not that it's stupid and Eurocentric and like white centric for white Americans to say, I have no culture. There is no culture here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because everybody has a culture.
Yeah.
I think you can say my culture currently right now sucks
Yeah.
because it's built on these values.
Yeah.
But then what comes after that is that's when you have to actually do some work into building, like participating in local cultures and showing respect for them
Right.
that don't suck
Yeah, and that I
and
think
things
that's
like that.
the big thing that we're gonna get into is it's like yes we have culture, but it's it's so much been like commodified and emptied. It's like well
Mm,
that sucks, and it is like difficult to yeah yeah anyway
yeah. Maxi Malo in the chat said, claiming to not have a culture because you are the default just means you live a homogenous life with no critical thinking skills. Um, yeah, I think there is a lot to it, and I think there is like almost it's almost like especially white people, but assimilated kind of westernized people in general, like have to build up almost like a cultural resiliency or something, like a, an ability to actually participate in culture actively and think about these things instead of just taking what you've been handed and being like, this sucks, I'm gonna go,
yeah
put on a bindi and dance a Burning Man about it or something.
yeah
The lack of curiosity that is pushed by whiteness. That's a good phrasing, I feel like.
yeah I like that a lot
Yeah. You can, and Medkip said, you can make a choice to have different individual values from your assigned cultural societal values, which usually are very capitalistic and very white supremacist. Yes,
yeah
this is this is great.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's this conversation is totally colored by being leftists and I don't know, alternative in a lot of ways, and queer, as both you and I are, but also as um, I think a lot of our audiences too, because
Mhm.
we we've rejected so much of our cultural identity, um, that has been sort of forced on us. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it too. Is it's like when you reject your culture because it sucks, like what do you do then? What's step two? Like,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
doing blood quantum is clearly not the right thing. But yeah,
Yeah. And I think it is because of like whiteness and colonialism, we have this idea of like a culture is this exotic, glamorous thing. And I think sometimes, especially
yeah,
for us queer people, finding your culture means volunteer at like a gay like senior center. You know what I mean? Like read like I've been going to the leather museums and archives and just reading old leather like books and learning more about queer history. Like those there are traditions and cultures that we are a part of that we are only here because of those things, and we can do things to keep those things alive, for example,
yeah,
uh, and build found family, chosen family, whatever you want to call it, um, like those, and establish new traditions and invent new traditions for us in the absence of them. Like we do have the power to do that. We don't have to plunder like a weird romanticized version of the past to do that.
yeah. Riddle me this now: is the current queer obsession with zodiac not cultural appropriation?
Well,
Cancelled.
but that's, I mean, that's also why I have my Pokemon types on the other one. I was like,
Yeah,
let's make our own new weird like traditions. Let's make
it's true.
our own like, rituals and things like that. Like um pop culture paganism, I think, is really cool and less cringy than a lot of other kinds of like neo-pagan stuff. There's responsible ways to do that stuff, but there's a lot of people who do it pretty cringy. But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, that was the one thing that when you asked about have I seen people like do like the oh well I'm 1% uh Irish or whatever. Um that's the one thing I have thought about is like which it's not so much from a like personal history, but I do know people have gotten into like witchy stuff and pagan stuff and that can sometimes feel a little like that. Um
yeah, yeah. Though it really varies. Like there are some people who are really cognizant of anti-blackness in the
yeah.
conversations of things like of witch stuff and like brujas and things like that, just like having a good understanding of like many different kinds of practices and what's responsible and not responsible for them. And then there's the people that are just fucking like QAnon shaman type motherfuckers, even but of the left.
Yeah. Uh uh Virulink said, "Witchy is nice until you start finding the divine feminine stuff everywhere." Uh,
Yes,
turf shit.
turf
Uh,
shit so hard. Yeah.
live in Portland, and there are so many divine feminine, weird Norse mythology worship folks. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. Um,
Yeah, the divine feminine shit is always like
it's
just so toxic.
yeah. Our I think of that. I mean, the best worded response to that is oh, Ursula K. Le Guin's quote. Are you familiar with that?
I don't know. I don't know which one.
She has so many great quotes. Uh let's see if I can pull it up. It just maybe I'm not gonna find. Yeah. Oh, found a post that read it, but it's just like, it's the same thing that like, a cult. She talks about a cult of women's knowledge, right?
Hmm.
And that being like the women's knowledge being of like cooking and growing things, and it's like, why can't well men get to talk about like intellectual things, and it's like, why is the
Why there's
divine
not
feminine,
intellectual? Yeah,
right? Yeah, but
yeah.
I didn't and still don't like making a cult of women's knowledge, preening yourselves on knowing things men don't know, women's deep irrational wisdom, wisdom's instinctive knowledge of nature, and so on. We that all all that we too often merely reinforces the masculinist idea of women as primitive and inferior. Women's knowledge is elementary, primitive. Get out of there, ad. Always down uh, below at the dark roots, while men get to cultivate and own the flowers and crops that come up into the light. But why should women keep talking baby talk while men get to grow up? Why should women feel blindly while men get to think?
Mm, yeah. There's there's so many layers to that particular kind of shit. Like it was
Yeah.
almost like a presaging cottagecore shit. Um, but then there's also people who do it cool. Like I have a friend who did doula work and also studied like
Yeah.
natural abortifacients and things like that, and the history of how these plants that you can use to induce an abortion were used by enslaved people in the US so that they wouldn't have to have the children of the people who had enslaved them and sexually assaulted them. And like there being like lots of traditions for kind of just spiritually how to like participate in that and stuff like that, and like
Hmm.
honor those plants and things like that. Like there are ways to do it. um
I think the idea
but
of
it's
it
about
being
learning your
like
history.
like she talks about it being like a cult of women's secret knowledge, right? Like
Hmm.
that's I think where it becomes really bad, is it's like this gendered uh uh it's turf shit. It's
Right.
gendered like biological instinct and stuff like that. And it's like,
Right.
well, do are women who are like who can't have kids part of that? Do they not get that? Like,
Hmm.
let alone trans people and all that, and just gender nonconforming people and all that shit.
Right. Right. And of course this binary, which is so just the gender binary rots our brains in terms of what we think is intellectually deep anyway, right? Like crocheting and knitting is like the first form of like computer programming, like
Yep.
as we've kind of talked about before. Like that was how people kept records in binary code in many indigenous societies in South America, for example. um, all of the earliest computer programmers were women, many of whom transferred over their skills from knitting and things like that to like the punch cards. So, um, even how we think about what's serious and what's frivolous is really fucked up by these ideas. So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, yeah. Um, so so again, we're kind of having Chama's kind of saying like, why wouldn't you just derive cultural meaning from the culture you're already existing in? Why are you doing this weird kind of fashy shit of like reaching back to your European heritage or appropriating a completely different culture? And then we have queer folk abroad saying, and this is similar to what I'll say farther down the thread, in certain ways. The problem here is that white Americans often haven't had any traditions handed down. Um, though this is, again, this is really not just a white. It's not only white people is where they're kind of missing here.
Right.
I barely knew paternal grandparents, never knew the maternal ones, met my cousins 2 or 3 times, don't know anything about my ancestors except maybe some were from Scotland 100 years ago and others from Ireland as long ago, never had a single tradition handed down from any of them. I have essentially no connection to anyone but my parents. No handed down culture distinct from default white American corporate culture, which is a culture. So you
Right.
know. This is default for white Americans in a way basically no one seems to comprehend. You keep saying practice the culture that was handed down, and there just isn't one. Now, I don't want a traditional ancestral culture or ancestral roots and have no clue why everybody seems so desperate for them, but they're just not there anyway. Um, so there are some elements of how they phrase this that are missing things a little bit. I get what they're trying to convey, but they are doing that thing of saying my culture's the default and therefore I feel like I have no culture, right?
Mm-hmm. which
Um,
which I think, as you're saying, is it's understandable because it's not. I mean, it's partly because it's the default, but again, as we've started to and get more into, it's less like there's an aspect of it where it's not just that it's the default culture, it's that consumerism is purposefully like destroys as a culture. And it's not so much that it's not a culture, it is that it is
mhm,
almost purposefully destructive in its culture, in its whiteness. White people
right.
are also victims of white supremacy culture, absolutely, and it's
Well said. Yeah.
yes, and same for patriarchy. Like I think a lot of this, it's the same that same thing that we were just talking about is super true. Like we are divided by patriarchy, and men are told that they're all these things that, like, both men and women are told there's so many things that they can't be. you know
Hmm.
and the things that they can be are so restricted, and that's all part of our culture. um and yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, there are a few aspects of how they say this that are like just a little bit, me being very nitpicky, like it isn't just a white person thing. This is what capitalist life does to people. It makes people so busy and so atomized, um, and forced into this nuclear family structure or less because the nuclear family is broken and so it's not sustainable. So people don't have any ties to their neighborhood. They don't have any ties to other generations. They don't have any consistency in where they're living, even if they want to. Like obviously moving is fine, but like people can't feel rooted. Um, and that happens to a lot of people of color, multi-generation immigrant families, diasporic peoples as well. And it does feel really empty. Um, there is a culture there, but it's a culture of like jingoism and you know football, watching football, and buying Funko Pops and things like that. Um, and so there is a place for people to kind of there is a reason why people kind of rebel against that and say that like this sucks. I want something more.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. Um, Husifer said, got white family members who only eat American food or refuse to learn other languages or engage with them. Just see an utter lack of curiosity and love. That is disheartening. That is very much how I describe a lot of people that I not everybody that I grew up around, but people I grew up with, some in my family, some just around me. This like lack of interest in learning about anything else.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. And I think it's, again, like we were talking about, being like, there's a lot of this stuff that I think me and you and people in our communities reject,
Mhm.
and so it's hard. It's like, again, what is that next step of feel like, I feel like I don't have a culture, not because I don't have one, but because I've rejected so much of the culture that I was given. And it's a long process of building up, like, you have to build that stuff from scratch. And I think that, um what we're talking about is that some of this stuff, like, I think it is really gross to do, that original person was saying, it is really gross to turn, like, looking back at your parents' roots into the blood quantum thing and into this weird fascist thing, you know, and but it is like that doesn't mean that you can't reach back and study the, you know, whatever culture that you have in a way that is more um more respectful to those cultures. But it's just it's not, you really have to, it's more work than it's not about going to ancestry.com and then
Hmm.
buying shit. It's a lot more work than that. And I think that that's
Yeah.
what this discussion fundamentally is about, is that the discussion is was started in talking about like it's cringe to do that kind of stuff. And it's like, and I think that we would say it is, yes, but it is, I think that there are ways in which we can do it well, and respectfully, and it's just about, it's just harder. And so it's like, how do you do that? And then the other thing I think that we'll get to is, I think it's about creating culture and finding things that are cultural spaces and cultural practices that maybe are not as traditional, and leaning into that more, and doing the work to expand that in your life and in your community. And that shit is hard. It's not going
Hmm.
out and buying green shit you know, it's not on St. Patrick's Day and
Yes,
getting an Irish car bomb. It's so
that's
fucked.
right.
It's so, that shit. I'm sorry. That shit is so fucked up. That's like it's like on. It's like on. I mean, I wouldn't care about this, but it's like on 4th of July. If you went to Ireland on 4th of July and they all were red, white, and blue and got a 9/11 as a drink, like
I
it's.
would love that. I would,
I mean,
please,
I would
please,
love that, but I'm not the
based,
one that
based,
gets to
based,
make
based.
that decision.
Why? Because you're not a 9/11
No, I
widow.
mean,
Like,
I mean, I'm not the one that should be ordering the Irish car bomb. Like, you know,
oh
like,
yeah, yes, no.
like,
I did see once at an L station on the Thorndale L station on 4th of July, which in Chicago is, oh, it's hell on earth here. The
yeah,
police blotter for Wrigleyville is literally, have I told you about this before?
I don't think
Like
so. I'm a little
the
familiar,
Wrig
but
the Wrigleyville police blotter on 4th of July is like 3 p.m. Couple found having sex in the gift card aisle at CVS. 3:30 p.m.
based, based.
Man down huffing computer duster in the CVS. Like woman groping the titties of every man who goes through the Taco Bell drive-through at 5 p.m. Like it's it's bedlam. It's fucking
uh,
unreal. But one time I was, they dye the river green. It's awful. Everything about it is hell on earth. It's the purge. You like lock yourself in because white people going crazy. But one time I was at the Thorndale L station on 4th of July and I saw somebody in a shirt that said, "Kiss my ass, I'm Polish."
I need that.
I know, it's so
I need
good.
that.
And that
Uh,
to me is the only valid way to celebrate and honor St. Patrick's Day.
yep. So the response to that, I think the one that we, like, the biggest criticism of the of this part of the conversation was, this person is like, well, I don't have a culture. And so um the dread vampy responds with a bunch of questions, um
Yes.
which I thought that I was really impressed with these questions. um and Devin goes on to answer them, and I think that's what we really want to do, is kind of break these down and question this, and like, what is this stuff now? And for those of us who feel like we don't have good answers to these questions, which doesn't mean we don't have a culture. It just means we
Hmm.
don't have a good
Don't
one.
like it. Yeah.
It's
Right.
bad. Like, what do we
Yes.
do about that? What are the ways in which maybe we can reach back to our previous, like, cultures that we come from? Are there ways to do that, or what do we, cultures can we help create for ourselves and our community.
Yeah. These questions are really both descriptive and potentially prescriptive. The Dread Vampy here phrased them to just because, especially if you're an American, especially if you're white, but not exclusively either of those groups, your culture is the water that you swim in. You can't see it. So these questions help describe, like, you do have a culture, whether you like it or not. This will help reveal some of the contours of what your culture is. But if you don't like these answers, then you can start thinking about, what do I want my culture to be? What do I want my holiday traditions to be? What do I want to eat? Who do I want to be around? Um, so so we'll spend a considerable amount of time looking through these questions and talking about people's answers, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff in here. Um, so first I'll just read them out,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can look at them in more depth, kind of one by one. Do
And
you know your parents?
please
Oh,
feel
sorry.
free to. I was just gonna before you start. Feel free to think about these, to answer them for yourself. If you're watching this, even as VOD, it might be interesting to answer these for yourself. Um, and you can answer them if you're here live. You can. We'll ask for them in the chat as we go through. So.
Yeah. So first, to just kind of do an overview of them. Do you know your parents? Who raised you? Who raised them? What foods do you associate with home? What did you eat growing up? What holidays do you celebrate and how? What lives on your shelves? What do you do in your leisure time? What music did your parents share with you? What beliefs? How do you dance and who taught you? What morals were you taught to prioritize? What songs did you learn as a child? What do you share with your parents? What do you share with family friends? Do you lock the door? Do you wear shoes indoors? What clothing feels appropriate to see your parents? What stories were you told at bedtime? What idioms and modes of speech do you use? How do you behave in others' houses? How do you treat guests in your own?
Um.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So we can kind of just go through them question by question and kind of talk through some of them and some of the things people had to share. But I think these are really good questions to ask, to just highlight both the small and big picture of what somebody's culture is,
Mm-hmm.
um, and also how a lot of that culture for a lot of people now is very sloughed off and buffed into the most frictionless thing possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. Who said that? And Cassie Bush
Um,
clearly says, "Can we talk about cultural Christianity also?" Which I think is a
yeah,
big part of this discussion that we haven't touched on too much in this discussion, but I think that's a huge part of it too. And I think it's one that I know um I think it's a bit of a blind spot for me to see, because I wasn't raised Christian. I was very much raised um atheist, in that both of my parents are ex-Christians, and did not raise me. Less atheist and more explicitly unreligious. Like, both of them are ex-Catholic, and they purposefully did not raise me Christian because they had both had pretty bad experiences with the Catholic Church. Um, but I forget that doesn't mean that it's easy to forget that it's like, well, yes, but they still have a lot of cultural, like, Christian sort of beliefs about stuff, and I live in a very Christian society, and so it's like, even the things I think are very, like, the way my morality, I think my morality is very, very much like, not a Christian morality, but it's very much like based on a Christian morality, as in a lot of, I really do think a lot of my morals are based, like, as like rejections or acceptance of different tenets of, like, you know Christian, Christian stuff, because that was, like, unconsciously how my, how morals were kind of given to me in the beginning. And so there's still I think that there is still like it's hard to explain because it's not that my morals are Christian, but they're like there's some basing off of it based on that, like because my morals have come from either a acceptance or rejection of different principles. There's like it's still a factor there.
Yeah, I have some questions for you about that. So okay, so first of all, did your family celebrate Christmas?
Yes. So that yes. So that was the one that so we very much did the standard holidays. The one that I have that is not the standard one is I all my Michigan homies probably know this one is Fat Tuesday. Do you know even do you are you familiar with Fat
Yeah,
Tuesday?
that's before Lent. Yeah, you just eat everything. You just party. Yeah.
Well, for us it was literally just punchkis. Do you have you guys might have
Oh,
punchkis in Chicago too?
yes, and Cleveland has a very large Polish population, so I
Oh,
know a
okay.
lot of like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Michigan, it's like not even really conceptualized as a Polish thing. It's just in Michigan you get punchkis. Uh, yes, spelled Pacczki. But that was the extent of it
Yeah.
for us. But
So
yeah,
okay, so you celebrated Christmas, Easter.
yes. When we were young, we would do Easter baskets. So my parents would hide Easter baskets, and we would find them.
Yeah. Okay, another question that I have. So okay, kind of the cultural Christianity in terms of like here are the traditions.
Yeah.
This is one that an acquaintance of mine, Brianna, who I'd love to have on the show sometime. I've sent you things that she said about polyamory before, but
Mm-hmm.
she said a lot recently that a lot of people are Christian brained without realizing it, in that we tend to prioritize forgiveness as an important moral value, and there's no reason to say that we have to forgive anybody for anything. So would
Yeah.
you, just as an example, would you say that that's something that was part of your moral upbringing, that like forgiveness was important?
So part of I'm trying to think. Part of my discussion of this is going to be a little bit vague and hazy because I have an extremely bad biographical memory. Um, but I I I I I can't think of anything. I think maybe I had different. My parents had different philosophies on that. I'm not sure if I was. I have a very strong memory of my dad of apologizing to my dad and my dad being like sorry doesn't fix anything.
Oh my God.
He was that kind of guy and like being a dick about
Yeah.
it too. And so I think
Uh,
that there may be I don't know, I wonder if that's an aspect of like a Christianized belief system but as like for maybe a rejection of that. um yeah. uh so I think I not super strongly. I think that it's definitely something that I think that like just so I don't have a lot of strong memories of like that, but I think just like feeling in my body, I think that I think I did get some amount of that and have consciously um yeah, I don't know. I feel like I have I'm unsure about how I feel about it. This is random, but I think a lot about if anybody has I don't I've only read the books, but I they probably have it on the show too. There's some stuff with forgiveness there, particularly with a character that does a bunch of mass murder. Um, and I remember being like very unsure. So I think maybe that's an area where that was like a thing that I a lot of that one of those things that got lost or has been skewed based on my parents' situation of like this in particularly I was raised ex-Catholic, right? Like
right.
my parents my parents don't have they're both a little bit uh uh agnostic in their own way. And so it's like, well, I know I'm not Catholic, so I think I was raised a little bit like so. Yeah, yeah, I think that's an
Yeah.
interesting question and one I'd like to hear people in the chat talk about. How do you
Yeah.
feel about forgiveness and that being an important thing?
Yeah, what you're saying, it definitely resonates. I feel like there is a distinction between there's like the cultural influence of your parents own you and you're their property and you have to obey them and they're not going to forgive you or forget anything that you do wrong
Yeah.
versus this weird almost uh Christian moral, like anybody who does any wrongdoing to you or in a workplace or at your church or in any community you're in, you have to forgive them and you have to work towards rehabilitating them. That gets used for a lot of like abuse apologist kind of stuff. Like I feel like it's both those things at the same time of like a politics of forgiveness for anyone with power who does anything wrong.
Right. Right. Right.
Like that's the actual, and that's certainly not what like historic Christianity was necessarily, but like that's what like American big butter Jesus fucking Christianity is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was a question that when Brianna posted about that, it did really help me uncover like that I still did consider that kind of a moral value that like, oh, ultimately if somebody does something wrong, like my politics should be to to work towards forgiving them if they don't do anything else wrong ever again. And like just to read, oh wait, no, I actually don't need to do that. Even if somebody does, let's say, completely turn their life around, you don't morally have to forgive them.
Right.
That was like, whoa,
And
holy shit.
that's an interesting
Like,
conversation that I re-examined. And I think that's why I'm like, I don't know if I have a good answer because I've done a lot of re-examining of that around abolition and prison abolition because I think that's an interesting. I thought it was interesting in prisons are obsolete. They talked about like there's a chapter that's like, well, what do you do instead? And forgiveness, like radical forgiveness, was one of the big things. I think that I mean that it's really about the idea that we can't imagine. We it's a we don't know. Like we can't
mhm,
figure out how to do it differently until we deconstruct the society we're in. But that was offered as an alternative, and I think it's really interesting having heard conversations around that later, when it's like, well, actually, you don't need to forgive people. Like that doesn't actually need to be a part of abolition. Um,
mm,
just because you don't forgive someone doesn't mean that you have to punish them. Um,
right.
so I think it's an interesting conversation. It's like as people that are culturally Christian and as people that are abolitionists to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we talked about this when we talked about Dawn of Everything, but this idea of it was like an American indigenous culture that like their practice was like if you murdered someone from if you were from an outside nation, an outside tribe, and you murdered someone from within, like it was the people who were mourning who got to decide whether you would be put to death or if you would take the person's place of the person you killed and you would take their name and you would live in the society as that person, basically. Like this idea that I find it very attractive, this idea of accepting that something that's happened cannot be undone. Like we should just accept reality as it is. And that doesn't have to be the same thing as being punitive or cruel for the sake of it, but there is no restoring
Mm,
sometimes things that were done.
yeah,
And like I, it was a different way to it's not something that we're given in the liberal West where we're supposed to forget history all of the time and pretend that
yeah,
things are fine all of the time.
yeah.
Um,
It's
while also
almost
punishing people.
yeah. It's almost a warped idea of what forgiveness really is. It's becomes uh for like a yeah. And it's one of those
Yeah,
things that it's different depending, like you were saying, like you're supposed to forgive people in power all the time. And so it's
right.
it's it's weaponized and, you know, different people.
Yeah. Lots of good things in the chat. Um, a lot of people talking about the difference between Jesus forgives you if you repent versus you're going to hell for being queer. Never being forgiven by your parents versus having to forgive anyone else. Um, forgiveness not being the same thing as forgetting. It's
Mhm.
good.
Yeah, saying shit like thank you for the apology is so important. Yeah.
Hmm. Unironically, there's a line at the end of The Last of Us 2 where Ellie says, like, I don't think I'll ever forgive you, but I'd like to try. And something about that just really like touched my heart. I don't know. I think it's a real idea. Parents wanting forgiveness but never apologizing for anything.
Yeah, I think it makes me think about respect. This idea that like people in power have respect, but people not in power need to earn respect.
Hmm. Yeah. There's respect of a person's humanity versus respecting authority,
Yeah,
and they get
that
equated.
yep. Um,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Oki fly. I went to an international school in China, and many students there identified with the term third culture kid since they were raised in a culture different from their parents and struggled with feeling like they had no culture of their own. That's extremely interesting because I also went to an international school in China. I wasn't raised there. I was there from about I was there for 2 or 3 years. When I was at in the beginning, like at the end of elementary school, so like sixth and seventh, and beginning of middle school, like sixth and seventh grade. I lived in Shanghai, China. Curious where you were at. Um, but yeah, that definitely makes sense, and I think that actually is a really good. If we're talking about more broad, before we, with like without getting into the individual questions, like broad cultural stuff, I think that is a really important part of my culture. Is that like cultural upbringing is that spent a couple years in China and then came back, and there was definitely a culture shock there.
Mm.
Um, between and it was also weird because it's not like I was in Chinese culture. Like I was in this sort of like international school, like miasma culture that was very much explicitly not Chinese, because Chinese students were actually not allowed to go there. um,
Wow.
because there's like they have to get taught the the way that Chinese government says that they need to get taught. So it was this weird, like mostly European kids, but a lot of Korean kids, some Hong Kongers. Um, yeah, very very interesting, interesting kind of bent to my cultural experience. I explicitly remember, since we were talking about Christianity, uh, I dressed. We did celebrate Halloween there, at the school, and there was a big Halloween thing, and I think a lot of the staff were probably American, even though a lot of the students were probably mostly white, but probably more European than American. Um, but there was a Halloween celebration, and I went as Jesus. I I had I had a white suit and a
Oh
black
my
tie
god.
and a little.
Oh.
If anybody was into Newgrounds, I was watching Madness, the Madness series at the time. Maybe I brought this up before on this show because we talked about Madness. Um, but yeah, there's a Jesus character in that looks like that, and so I dressed up like that, and nobody gave a shit at all except this one American girl that I didn't know. Like, I think she was in a different grade than me. She was like the one American girl. She was like, "That's really offensive," and I was
Oh
like,
my god.
"Sorry, I don't care."
God, that's cute.
Yeah.
Now that, and I will say that's probably the hallmark of American culture that is cool, Halloween.
Oh
That's
yeah,
let's
that's a super American
let's keep
thing.
it. Yeah. Yeah, they don't that was jarring for me to learn that, like, say in the UK, like, they
Yep,
don't give a fuck about that. Like, it's not. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Um Quarian said forgiveness as absolvement from wrongdoing rather than teshuva as Jewish repentance through words and action with no expectation of forgiveness. Love that. Like, it's like both of those elements. It's your actions, and you're not doing it to be forgiven. It's just
Yeah,
you're doing it because it's what you do. Like,
yeah, I
it's how
like
you
that a
move
lot.
forward. Yeah. Uh, yeah, and I think the international school experience that you're talking about, it just reminds me a lot of how like when different diasporic or refugee populations end up together, or sometimes children who've been taken from their families due to things like native boarding schools and things like that, like the different like languages that evolve and get invented, like and there's some that have different combinations of different grammatical rules, just like there's this cultural mixture and also this need for cultural reinvention that just like happens in a vacuum like that.
Yeah,
um it's just a lot of like interesting and hard things that happen, especially
yeah,
if it's prolonged when somebody's in that situation.
yeah. I'm really curious about the idea of third culture kid, um, and would like to look into that. That's it. Really interesting. Um,
Yeah.
I also think of uh, myself as being. I actually relate a lot to being people that talk about being a military brat, um, which I am not. But I when I was a kid, even before moving to China, I moved schools a lot because I don't know, I guess the schools that were nearby me, my parents didn't really like, so I didn't until I was in high school, I didn't stay in one school for more than like 2 years. And I think that that's another thing that really um added to my personal alienation, um because I didn't have friends for more than a brief period of time, and I became really adept at like meeting people for the first time, but not holding on to those connections. Um,
Mm.
so I think that that adds to my like personally why I've I think I I I feel disconnected from cultural stuff.
Yeah. It really is like the whole like everybody has their own gender when you really drill down into it thing. Like everybody
Yeah.
has their own unique cultural experience because every family like but particularly when families are so isolated due to like capitalism and things like that. Like
Is being forced to move frequently for economic reasons part of American culture? Lol, says Small Steer. And kind of.
yeah.
I think about my maybe a little bit less so of my friends from when I was a kid, but I think about all of my adult friends. I don't know anybody who has stayed in one place for any length of time as an adult. I
Yeah.
literally can't think of a single person. Um, Now into my 30s, I think that there's some of my like the most the like some the, my most well off friends have started to lay down roots, and are in places that I could see them being in longer term. But that's that's 30-35 age range
Yeah.
is just starting to be able to put down those roots.
Yeah. I have a very micro version of that where it's like I've been in this city for a long time and I have lots of enduring friendships and um, city events that I participate in every year that like it is a cultural kind of establishing of roots. But I've also moved apartments every year or 2 years
Yeah, I'd
my
say that's
entire
more
adult
what I'm
life.
talking. Yeah, say that's more what I'm talking about, um, with people that I know. But yeah, so
And
there is
that,
right.
yeah. So like there is, I mean, and I know so many people who do have to literally move cities all the time. I mean, everybody in academia, it's cruel. It's so fucked up that that's like to be a serious academic, you need to just not have any community ties.
Yeah,
Like no wonder academia is so white when that's
right.
your is you're just expected to just move to Fargo if that's where the job is and abandon everyone and have no one that you're responsible for. That's a whole other rant. But like even on the micro level of just never having stability, which most of us don't of our generation, you don't accumulate any stuff. You never have a space where you can have people over for dinner.
Yeah.
You don't learn any instruments because you don't have the closet space. Like all of these small things just really build up. And I have lived a very like intense version of that because I'm just like an anti-hoarder and I just strip down and you know, to an excessive degree, but like it does actually prevent you from having like cultural and community ties in a very real way, even if you're just bopping around from one neighborhood to the next. Like,
Hmm.
you don't know your neighbors and things like that. Um, and
Yeah.
that's only maybe going to change because I'm, y'all can all cancel me like Hassan, if I might like buy a condo or something, like the
Oh, you're
devil.
gonna be a
Um,
you're gonna buy it. You're gonna start being a landlord, right? Like that's what
no,
you told
no,
me.
no, I never said that. Jesus Christ, no.
I'm kidding, obviously. You're gonna be bell hooks. It's not who it was.
No, I'm gonna be what's the comedian, Hannibal Buress.
Oh
Um,
God, yeah.
no, no, I'm not gonna do that. Um,
But anyway,
but yeah, yeah,
let's focus. I in and actually answer these questions because I think
yes,
because we've talked a lot about mostly I've rambled about stuff, but let's focus because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
yes, so much, um, so much to be said.
I was thinking maybe I could. You know what I'm gonna do is um, I'm gonna
Put like
cop.
the list style of them, or
Yeah, maybe I'll copy the list. Wonder if I can actually copy this. Can I put this? No, it's above the character limit. I can't put it in the chat.
oh yeah,
But I'm gonna
band,
copy it and put it in Drive, and then I can make it big and a little bit easier to
yeah,
read.
yeah. I can also screen share whatever's easier, or like the way you had it formatted in the Discord.
Yeah, I was thinking if I do it that way, I can add some line breaks.
Yeah.
Maybe make the text a little bigger.
Yeah. Um, Peritologia said, for someone like me who grew up in a culture that, while it's disintegrating under capitalism like any other, at least encouraged rituals and connections, not just with blood family, but with the whole community. Hearing this kind of thing from white Americans is wild, but it helps understand the levels of alienation you see. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I don't want to be like the oh boo-hoo for white people or anything, but I think it is helpful to understand like this is what's coming for any culture under
Yeah,
capitalism, like void, you know? And it
yeah,
happens, I hear it from so many Mexican American people, but immigrants, so many groups of people. Um, so
yeah.
yeah.
I definitely don't think this is a unique experience to white Americans. And I think that yeah, I think that it's capitalism and uh, consumption culture that does it,
Mhm.
and imperialism. Um,
Yeah.
and I think I mean, we have had a our culture of like we talked about in the dawn of everything conversation, like we have been living under capitalism and cultural imperialism for a long time, but that's hasn't been forever, but it is long enough that it is an international phenomenon. It is
Yeah.
no culture can escape that. And it is but it's also like most, and that is mostly a white phenomenon, white European slash American phenomenon of like going outwards, but it's not unique to that cult like capitalism and imperialism is not complete, although it's
It
dominantly
touches everywhere.
right.
Yeah.
It's dominantly whiteness and Europeanness and Americanness, but it is not solely that for sure.
Yeah, there was this amazing article, and I can pull it up and put a link to it in the chat. It was from a Nigerian writer. I think it was in the New York Times, and she was talking about how when she grew up in Nigeria, it was very common for like girls would hold each other's hands walking down the street, men would hug each other, people were very affectionate. And then she and her family moved to the US, and suddenly, to blend in, it was just physical proximity and touch was not acceptable. But then she went back years later to Nigeria, and it wasn't normal there anymore either. People weren't
Yeah.
cuddling and touching each other. Like it was a cultural shift that had happened everywhere because of US influence, European influence, and all of those things. Like it comes for you no matter where you are. Um, yeah.
So let's start going through these questions. Our answers, we got some pre-answered, and if people want to answer in the chat, do you know your parents and who raised you? and who raised them is sort of a similar question.
Yeah. Um, so when it comes to like forced assimilation, this is one of the first ways that you just destroy a culture, right? Is by taking children away from their parents, putting them in boarding schools, having them adopted by white families if they're non-white, things like that. But
Yeah,
there's like the micro. Oh, go ahead.
there's a big conversation to be had about adoption and how like how that's an ongoing thing of like a thing that I've learned. And I'd love to learn more about adoptee rights and stuff like that. But one thing that I learned recently is that if you are an adoptee, they in the United States, your birth certificate is legally changed and your old one sealed, and so
Mhm.
you are not able to see it legally. There's no way
Except
to
in
see.
California.
Has that been changed in California?
Yeah, they're an open adoption state. There might be a couple others, but yeah,
Yeah.
for the most part.
Um, so that is like such a huge thing. Um, for myself, I was raised by my parents mostly. Um, I in while I was in China, I did have we had two uh, IEs, which are it means auntie in Mandarin, and usually in Western expatriate culture, it was very much like a maid, um, basically a live in help. Very much the help kind of vibes of, or
Mm.
sometimes live in, very infrequently could people they usually IEs can't speak English, and or can't speak the language of their employers, and it's I found that in reflecting on the situation, being an expatriate in China was really weird because it was a really racist. It was like a racist culture to the race of people that we're living with, which was very strange, especially because so much of the culture of people that went to the internet, that were part of the international expatriates like community were so much richer than so many of the people in China. Like not all, obviously, but like that was very much the experience. Um, but my dad, I was when I lived there, it was just my dad. My mom continued to live in the U.S. and it was just my dad, and he went on business trips a lot. So we found someone who did speak English and was very much more specifically supposed to be more like a live-in nanny. So she lived with us. She was like a college student, and her name was Kathy, and she lived with us, and she would like cook for me and kind of raise me while I was there a little bit. Um, and she had another friend of nursing student friend, like fellow nursing student friend of hers, who I think was having trouble finding stuff, like being able to get work or continue her studies or something like that. And so she was like, could she come and live with us too? So they actually both bunked. It was like a small room. They had like bunk beds, and they like bunked together so that they could both stay there and um like watch us and stuff. But so that is another person outside of my parents. um but the other thing I would say, a, a big part of my kind of cultural upbringing is how disconnected I was from my extended family. My extended family was very much the black sheep of the family, and um, partly because of my disabled brother, like we couldn't do things, but also and people didn't want to come to us because it was So yeah, I think that is a element of my of like isolation where they're just other than that time when I was in China, I didn't have adults in my life.
Mhm.
My I isolated even from my parents, but like no other adults, and I think that that's a huge thing. Like that's what we talk about in the way that, um, like this standard white nuclear family is really isolating because I didn't really know my grandparents. I didn't really know, even though we were a Catholic family, and my parents have fucking 7 and 9 people. No, excuse me, not 9 and 12 people, like siblings in their family.
Wow.
But I don't fucking know any of them, um,
Mm,
because we were so isolated from those groups. Um, and
wow.
I think that's a common experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, my my answers are on the Tumblr, but it's very, my parents did raise me until they got divorced, and my dad and I disowned each other when I was about 16. Um, and there's of course the like literal proximity of knowing the people you live with, and then there's the emotional intimacy side of things. And I would say that there was a lot of like not necessarily having the most emotional communicative tools. um, my mom's side of the family was always present in terms of grandparents living nearby. Aunts and uncles would see them at holidays and things like that, but not really feeling like there was much like emotional disclosure or intimacy there. Um, Whereas my dad was a little bit more emotionally expressive and present, to the extent of like not having appropriate boundaries with a child about what you tell them,
Yeah,
and what you kind of make them emotionally responsible for. Um, and my dad's mom, Joanne, my grandmother, she's like this one like shining exception in my memory, my upbringing, of somebody who was very emotionally present with me and would, you know, somebody who would actually like hold you when you're crying and talk to you about what you're upset about, and also someone who was the real font of any kind of sense of cultural ties, from Appalachia. She would talk to me about a lot of her experiences growing up in rural Tennessee in the mountains, about like just the amount of intellectual and emotional depth there is like far and away different from any other relationship I had in my family. Like she would talk to me about um, things like, oh, I grew up being taught X, Y, and Z racist thing, and here's why it was wrong, and here are some of the things I had to do to grow up prematurely because both of my parents were alcoholics, and were very
yeah,
young when they had me, and like here's why that was damaging to me, and like that degree of self-awareness and inner reflection was not something otherwise that I had modeled for me, but it was really, really special. And I think put me on a different path from who I would have been if I didn't have someone who was really interested in my like philosophical thinking, talking to me about culture and history. She also just had, getting down the list when we talk about some of the other questions, turns of phrase that were very Appalachian, and cultural ties that were a little bit more complex, talking about the family history, talking about whiteness and passing, because her dad was not white passing until he moved to Ohio and kind of basically tried to. Um, like there was like a depth there that was otherwise lacking. She died when I was about 13. Um, and that is the only connection to that side of the family I had. Everybody else was
yeah,
still in Appalachia, and they didn't talk. And family record keeping is really bad there. Even doing genealogy research, most of those people were not literate. There's not consistent spellings of names. There's not consistent records of who, when someone was born, what race they were, what like any like one from one census to the next, somebody's a completely different person. Um, and so there is that kind of detachment there in that sense. So
yeah.
it's yeah.
It really feels like this is a big one to focus on because I think so much. I think something that both of us had to some degree, and I think is a big, um, part of this conversation for people that feel similar to us, is this disconnection from our parents, and
Mhm.
disconnection, and then also disconnection from uh extended family. And that's like, I think it's a thing that we've talked about a lot, how this atomization of the family, like if it's just you, this idea that like, I think I think that the valorization and atomization of the nuclear family is like really a big part of this conversation, because it is such a
Yeah.
dominant force in white American society. Not solely, obviously, but um, I think it is a huge thing that is part of American culture, and has, in particular, and has, I think, spread from it, is this idea that, like, two parents raise their kids and that's it. Um, and it makes it puts this strain on the relationship with your parents to be everything, and it's just not possible. It's just not possible to for that relationship to be that, that much. And the only other adults you have in your life, like, typically are like teachers who are
Mhm.
always changing, and even if you have, like, always and always underpaid and not able to give you the time, what you're one of 20 or 30, and it's it's way too much. um
Yeah.
some Madkip says, sometimes I say the internet raised me, but that's not a flex. Yeah, I think that could be true for us, for myself at least
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, like that was when around the time that, and some of this is just entering adolescence, right? But like around the time that grandmother of mine died, that's when I was really getting into like forum culture and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like you did kind of replace like who do I have to confess things to, and who will
Yeah.
tell me interesting things, and it became the internet. Often adults on the internet to varying degrees of like sometimes it was a totally respectful, healthy thing, whatever. Sometimes it wasn't, but um, yeah. Um, it's Farrar had a good message in the chat. Did the people in your family recognize the value of the cultural knowledge they had to impart? I think the answer is often no. And that's a really sad thing that limits cultural sharing. This is something I've heard from a lot of people who are like second, third, etc. generation immigrants, that their parents or grandparents had a ton of cultural knowledge, but they were trying to assimilate. They were trying to have their kids blend in. And so they didn't want to impart the language,
Yeah.
traditions. They don't see it as a valuable thing to pass on, and so then there's this disconnect there. But I think it's also true in some of the stories we're telling too about our families. Like people don't even think of, I need to intentionally keep a culture alive if I, or like that might be something my kid might need or something that's important to me. Like
Yeah.
I, I think we're at a moment in time where people were not thinking like that for the most part. I think my grandmother was, but other than that, yeah.
I know for me, so much of that. I mean, I don't have a good connection. My connection with my parents is so strained because, and this is the thing we've talked about a little bit, other because, of my brother Ben's care took so much of their time and emotional bandwidth. Like, I I was like, there was like aspects of emotional neglect, because they just weren't, they made sure food was in the fridge, and that was like what they were able to do. um
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is a really common cultural experience for people in our situation, because because of capitalism. I mean, like, how are you supposed to have a good relationship with your kids when you're working, you're working all the time, and you don't have time to yourself, let alone time to, have time with your kids. And I think that's a sadly a really common experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Absolutely. People both didn't have the means and the time to do it, and also it was just something that the dominant cultural programming was like, that's not important. That's not something you even think about. Like the emotional intelligence was just not there for many of our parents' generations.
Yeah.
Lots of good things in the chat. Peritologia said, one of the ways I can precisely see the way I was raised disintegrating is the growing importance of the nuclear family and how I don't see kids call unrelated elders in town uncle/aunt. I
Yeah.
feel like people are so much more distrustful of each other than when I was a kid. Yes. Um, and that is such an essential thing to so many more interconnected cultures, is having lots of aunts and uncles, including people who are not blood relations, like being raised by the community. And fear of crime is another big piece in this. Fear of strangers, fear of crime, fear of the other,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to like capitalist animization. Like that's another tool of it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Chicago said, "Yeah, the fact that my dad speaks Spanish and apology. Remind me how to pronounce this if you've told us already. Nahatlo. Not. Please let me know how to pronounce that. But taught me neither of those languages makes me want to die. Yeah, it's so sad that people don't like see their cultural knowledge as like something to be proud of and like a treasure to like pass on and part of how you relate to someone.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was the other thing
Not what.
I was
Not
gonna
what. Thank you.
I was gonna say about my own experiences of like I was saying, like my parents didn't pass on their cultural traditions in a lot of ways because those cultural traditions were Catholic, and my parents were both abused by those traditions. So
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's pronounced not what, and you can ignore the TL because you're white. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's also such a big thing. Maddie, going back to what you're saying, when there's like a history of trauma and abuse, and I think it's similar to some of the stuff that we were talking about. It's like if you reject your home culture, are you going to intentionally give your kid something else to be rooted in,
yeah,
or, or are you just trying to survive?
there's too many good comments. That's the problem when we have these discussion focused streams. Is there's too many good comments, and I can't read and talk at the same time. I don't know how to solve
Yeah.
that, but thank you everybody for commenting who you are, whether or not we get to it.
Yes. Okifly says, my dad is the youngest of his siblings by 10 years. He's Chinese and got sent by the government to boarding school during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So he grew up very separated from his family. He moved to the US when he married my mom and did his best to assimilate, so he never spoke Chinese to my siblings, and avoided answering any questions about his upbringing. Another example of how that manifests.
Yeah. From some of the responses we got beforehand, I know Corian said that um that and sort of the preamble uh uh and so sort of the preamble they said that they actually have a really good relationship with their parents and want to talk about that because they can't because everybody has such terrible relationships with their parents, and it comes across as like bragging, which I think is a really good point and like towards what we were talking about. And I think that's partly us being queer and counterculture and leftist. Like I think that definitely skews that way, but it feels really true, and I think that that's because of all the reasons we've been talking about. But for this question, they said I was raised by my mother and father. We was both raised there by respective mothers and fathers, and had a warm relationship with all four grandparents before they passed. So I think that again is part of that. Um,
Yeah, it's important to know what like examples of what healthy connections look like. Like it shouldn't be, that's not bragging. There's nothing inappropriate about talking
oh
about it. Or it
yeah,
should be.
sure, yeah, yeah. And Bo Beebs talks about feeling um, uh, feeling some disconnection from their parents too. I
Mm,
only know a few stories from their past because they seldom told us children. Um, they raised me almost exclusively because they were away from extended family for 8 years of my life. So, uh, and photo talks about being a military family as well.
mm. Um, Grand Chicken Lord in the chat asked, when you ask, do you give your kids something else when you don't pass on your ancestors' culture because it might be awful? What sort of thing do you mean? For me, saying that, I mean things like, do you have community ties? Like, I don't know. I think it's very important for a parent to have friends, to have like relationships, and to model that for their kids to know lots of adults, kind of like what Maddie was saying, just as an example, like to have things that you do that you believe in, that you like enjoy, and things that you think matter, you know. Um,
That's such an interesting question. Um, do your friends have? Do your parents have friends? Is such an interesting question. Um, maybe like, do your parents have like have a healthy amount of friends, whatever you define that as? Um, I'm gonna put that as a poll in the chat because I'm curious what people think of that. Do your parents have a healthy amount of friends? So like people they see regularly, like more than
yeah,
one. Like maybe not, and you know, maybe healthy is maybe too strong a word. Um
it's not even about number, also, right? It's like the quality of the friendship, like you said, like
yeah.
seeing them regularly. Yeah.
Uh so I'm just gonna say have friends, and with those caveats that I just described. Um and just yes, no, or eh.
Hmm.
uh, I'm very curious, you know.
Yeah. And I think in some cultures where people are more connected to a larger expanded family and community neighborhood, like the way people think about friendship, it might be different, but like they have social ties, right?
Right.
Or to Paratologia's most recent comments point, like if you're a kid and your parents suck, you have other people you can go to, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of people's parents have friends.
More than I
That's good.
would have thought. Yeah. But
Yeah. Yeah.
still, yeah, definitely still, and no combined are definitely winning. Definitely more in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
My mom's friends are very catty and always have drama. Wins at
Fun.
44%.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, this is just making me even more aware of like, wow, I don't know, just puts things in perspective a little bit.
Yeah. I think our experiences are really similar in a lot of, and like even for very different reasons. I think our experiences are have some similarities, so it's an interesting conversation for us to talk about this in the conversation of like compared to our community. I think is also a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and just like what is common in a lot of these cultures, like
Yeah.
maybe for example in America, maybe more people's parents have friends than I would have guessed, but it might be like drinking buddy, coworker kind of thing. I don't know, for a lot of people.
Hmm. My parents are really involved in their church, and so have community and the kind of ties to people. It's interesting because there was literally just, I mean, we could do a whole like side discourse about this, but I just literally just saw a tweet. There was a tweet in the kind of Twitter discussion world that was like, somebody was like, we need a secular church. Um that's like, you know, about coming to get like having community, you know, having community that and like singing songs and doing things that isn't a religious institution. And
Mhm.
basically, the consensus on Twitter was that it was Reddit and cringe, which, I mean, but I think it's a thing I've heard a lot from people that are secular, and I do think it's an aspect to this conversation where it's like, that's an aspect of what we were talking about, of like us rejecting our, the culture that, maybe our parents and grandparents have, was a big aspect of their culture, because we think it sucks. Like there's a lot of aspect, even the best churches, like there's a lot of, yeah, it's Callisto, it's called the community center. Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's one
Uh,
aspect for sure.
but right, yeah. And I think, but I do think about that as like the loss of religious, like religious, I'm not, I think for a lot of people that are in a similar position to us, that is a thing that, maybe our parents and people that came before us had, that we don't have necessarily. Um,
Mhm.
and so finding places like that and getting similar things is important.
Yeah, which I think first means like even acknowledging those needs, like because yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's a community center. Like so, like what does a church do? Like it provides resources sometimes, like food to people in the community. It provides sometimes some kind of moral, philosophical upbringing for emerging adults. Not a helpful one in my case, but like maybe it would have been cool as a teenager to have a place to go to talk about philosophical things and what it means to be a good person. Like
Right.
to be able to actually have your own way to think through that, like that might have actually been a cool thing. And mentors, um it's a place to just have regular ongoing events so you see people and have a sense of constancy. um Ritual, this is something we've talked about a little bit before in the context of like American Christianity. So much of how we talk about faith is like, do you believe in it? It's just this private thing that you do and you just say words to God in your head in your bed, versus some other faith traditions, it's about a ritual practice that you engage in because it grounds you or because it's important. And it's not about whether you believe in it or not, it's just you show up and you do the thing, and that's meaningful. It's an action rather than a feeling.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that the church served in American life, let's say, and in other places, that lots of different things could take that place, but currently often does not
Mm-hmm.
feel like. Yeah. Are secular choirs a thing around the world? They exist in the UK, but I don't want to assume. Here in the US, we definitely have a lot of gay choirs, and that's a very important cultural tradition. Um, Usually, we're traditionally gay men's choirs, but now they're usually they're open to everyone. Just as an example, but also like community through like the Parks District would be kind of more general ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Smallest Deer said, I tried finding community in the Unitarian Universalist Church because they seemed cool, but their response to Gaza, not even calling it a genocide, made me feel alienated and disconnected. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty you kind of shit, unfortunately.
My
Some of them are
a
cool and
friend of
others
mine had a very similar experience. Yeah.
very liberal. Crunchy liberal, but still very liberal. Sucks. Um, and this also reminds me a little bit of the conversation of like, we need more queer spaces that aren't bars
Yeah.
discourse, where it's like, yeah, we also need people to like build those things. Like if you want that thing, you have to build it and commit to participating in it rather than just wanting to reap the benefits,
Yeah.
which sounds kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but I don't read it like that. I
Right.
mean, like, we need to rethink how we think about community spaces and be
Uh,
willing to give a lot.
Blanderson says, I grew up mostly with my mother who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She never had any friends or community, and I'm starting to wonder if was more going on than am I for her, considering how little social contact she was she's been capable of. Yeah,
Mm,
and I think that that goes a lot back to, because I think that that has some similarities to like my experience, right? Where it's like, well, I mean, both of my parents definitely had um, untreated mental health stuff, um, and my, you know, a big part of my family's dysfunction was that they were trying to care for my brother's disabilities and not having the support. And I think that again is because like you know, like you're saying, you know, it was mostly one parent that was parenting you, and that person had mental health un like that mental health stuff that wasn't um addressed. And I think that that's so common, because and that is a two factor sort of thing where it's like, one, it's that we don't take care of each other as a society, and you know, so people's mental health isn't taken care of, but then also because of this
mhm.
atomized way in which our society is broken down into these individual families, like your parents, or your one parent or a single parent is left to with all of the responsibility to parent their kids, and there isn't this
Yeah,
like, I feel like social safety net is the like what people discuss, but that's so like I'm not talking just about like food stamps. Like, I mean, that stuff is really good and important, but that's so it, you know, that's what we're talking about here is culture. It's not just uh, it's that our culture is it feels like doesn't have a lot of this stuff in it.
right. Yeah, it's again, it's not just material needs in the most basic, like just like a family can be emotionally neglectful if you and feed you, you know.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it's that for sure, but it's deeper than that. Um, and this reminds me of the Jesse Meadows, the autism mom. Why is she like that? Article that in disability discourse we single out parents, individual parents who are abusive or neglectful when we have to look at the whole the just the absolute lack of support
Yeah.
that leads to that.
Yeah.
Um, there was a really good message in the chat from Otis Monkey. I've been in a game group that meets every other week since my friend's first child was a newborn. I've really seen their kids grow up, and it's cool to know those kids have known me their whole lives. We all have our own invented holiday, Dwarf Day, where we hang out
It's so
and drink
good.
mead and add our grudges to the grudge book. Dwarves never forgive and forget. As the
Oh.
years go on, there are more and more kids at Dwarf Day. Sometimes you just got to invent it yourself. I love that. I think that's such a good example of what solving some of these problems for ourselves, building our own communities can look like. That's so fucking cool. Like you've
Yeah.
created a culture, you and your friends, like
And I think that that's the
that
thing
owns.
that I'd love to explore is like, I don't know, that shit is great.
Mhm. Yes. And this is actually something that I've kind of put in the sequel to Unmasking Autism that I've been writing. That like because we have to unmask our whole lives, right? And that means rethinking our relationships. And so sometimes that means making a new family, and that doesn't just mean picking the people. It means how are you going to stay together? What are your new holidays going to be or traditions going to be? Like what does family even mean to you? What is missing, and how are you going to plug those things full?
Um okay, should we do another question?
Yeah, yeah. It's looking like we might need to do a part two of this string.
That's a
Also, if
great
you're
idea.
amenable,
I
because it's
am.
just been so good.
Mhm. Um yeah, please, I would love I there's too many good comments in the chat, and I don't know what to do about that. But I love it. Please continue to put them in
Yes,
there. Um
yes, yeah.
maybe even reading through some of this chat. Maybe doing a part 2 and reading just reading through this chat too. Okay. So the next one is, what foods do you associate with home?
Yes. And we could maybe combine that with what did you eat growing up?
Yes, yeah, that's kind of
Those two.
the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, I uh my I feel like I have a very strange relationship with food personally, um, because my I th- my mom definitely had an eating disorder for sure. So that's kind of some of the basis of it. I think that that comes from I think both of my parents probably had somewhat of a strained relationship with food because both coming from these gigantic Catholic families that like I think feeding all of those kids was a I mean even though both of my parents were did my mom's family was uh like pretty comparatively wealthy and my dad's family was I don't think they were wealthy but they were okay. Um like definitely like I think middle class. Uh and but still even doing okay financially I think just like feeding all of those kids sounds like I think was a huge chore and particularly for my mom was the oldest girl and so I think she was had that and this is a big thing that we haven't really talked about but I think is a big part of this like cultural thing is that there was a big expectation for my mom to be the help raise the family because she was the oldest girl. Um, so and then on top, so my mom had issues with food, and I think the way that she dealt with that is she became a cook. So she was actually a at one time she actually was the head chef of a 5-star restaurant in Detroit. Like a I think a vegan or vegetarian restaurant like in the 70s in Detroit, like a really fancy
Wow.
restaurant. Um, and so she got and which she described as being like a really abusive situation. Like I mean, not but like she said that she would fucking literally dream the recipes for the next day because she wrote the menus. And so
Hmm.
she said she would literally dream the fucking recipes for the next day because that was the only time she had to fucking like create those recipes because she was so busy all the time.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and then after that my mom when I was alive my mom's whole life was very much like a huge part of the labor that went into taking care of Ben was he had a lot of dietary restrictions and he also ate a lot my mom was always trying to like do like have very specific dietary things and messing with that and then also like a lot of the actual feed well a lot for a lot of my life a lot of actually feeding Ben was like something that um I mean we always had caregivers for Ben in the home and so my mom was like managing that and a huge part of my relationship with food is that like my home was like a business to some degree
Mm.
because there was so much like the kitchen was like where like Ben's food would get made and that was like such this huge project and literally a bunch of other people that I that I didn't really know were there doing it and so I think that that's a huge part of my relationship with food. um yeah.
Yeah. So did that feel then like everybody else in the family, what you ate was kind of just whatever you got, kind of a
Yeah,
thing?
sometimes I think my mom would kind of go do really like bigger stuff but like really inconsistently. So I think I did get really good food and my mom would make really nice good stuff cuz she knew how, but it was very inconsistent and sometimes I feel like sometimes I was just kind of like finding what cuz a lot of the food was a lot of the stuff was dedicated to like what Ben ate, which was like not really stuff I wanted to eat cuz it was all very much like he had a lot of choking risks. And so it was always super like it was always like pureed and stuff like that because he would eat too fast and then choke. So I didn't really ever want, and it was always like gluten free and all this other stuff. So it was not really anything I wanted to eat. And um, So yeah, there was a definitely weird kind of foraging. I have specific memories of like eating at night when no one, because people weren't really around as much then, and like so uh yeah.
Yeah. I yeah, my relationship to food in the house, it was definitely height of the 90s, Weight Watcher, very normalized eating disorder craze, like, nobody who would think
Yeah.
of themselves as eating disordered, but took no pleasure from food and had a lot of guilt and shame and comments about their bodies that you absorb as a kid, even if it's not put on you, which, it was not put on me, combined with a lot of both kind of white Midwesterner hangups around just not having a lot of interest in other kinds of cuisine or seasoning things or whatever, not really appreciating food deeply,
Yeah.
plus my sister um, had was very underweight as a kid, very like sickly, didn't like any food. I think it is like an autism spectrum thing, textures and things like that. And she used to have a lot of baggage around that because people would really shame her and tell her to eat more. Not my parents, but like other like parents and at school and teachers and just anybody she met, like this perception of her looking like neglected because she was just so like skinny and she didn't want to eat anything and being pressured to eat things, when she just really did not like anything except for like just really the most bland like stuff. um, so that kind of put a limit on what was in the house, as well as just my family was just not like a cooking house, so a lot of what I grew up with was just kind of, you know freezer chicken nuggets kind of deal. um, Subsisting, lots of grazing, snacking, things like that.
Yeah.
Other than, and so I think that actually did feed into my own eating disordered stuff in a way that wasn't really. There's elements of it that it was truly nobody's fault, where it's just like this. I'm the opposite way, where I'm an undertaster. I'm a sensation seeker when it comes to food, and so this really bland food that was around me was disgusting to me, and I didn't have a word for that because it didn't hurt me the way that Stacy having to eat something too spicy or what or too flavorful like would have been
Yeah.
hurtful to her. So I didn't really know what like having an appetite and appreciating food was, or how to cook. I've really only learned to cook in the last couple of years, last like 2 years or so, or year and a half really. um and then there were some holiday things that I would definitely consider, like certain like a pecan pie recipe, a very specific like German kind of noodle recipe at Thanksgiving and Christmas, um, things like that. Um, Sauerkraut on New Year's, which I think again is like a German. Though I don't know that anybody in my family actually is German, so I don't know how that happened. But whatever, those things kind of trickled down and became kind of traditions. But other than those couple of holidays, there wasn't a lot of reverence for food. It wasn't really considered like that. And I think, I had an eating disorder for a whole lot of reasons. But that was maybe the last stage of recovery for me, is learning to actually like appreciate food and have a zest for it and think ahead. I never
Yeah.
learned to think ahead about what I was going to eat and like look forward to a meal and plan it out and
Yeah.
see that as this really fulfilling sensory experience, both like the physical preparation, enjoying that, as well as actually enjoying eating things. Um, that's been it's been nice to kind of develop as an adult.
Yeah. I think for me, I have some similar thing. I think eating was such like a like food, especially for Ben, and but also it just feels like this like huge chore and task, and I think that has made it really hard for me uh to meal plan, especially and like
Mm,
that kind of stuff.
that makes sense. Yeah, it was a really fraught thing in my house. I know that when my mom did cook something, and if I didn't want to eat it, it really hurt her feelings. There was a lot of like she's not very emotional, but that was something that just like really made her sad. And so there's lots of like weird guilt and tangled up feelings there, and just like
Same.
all
Yeah.
kinds of weird baggage.
Yeah, my mom is
Mhm.
like the whole thing with my childhood is like my mom being overworked constantly, and
Mhm.
so it's like, oh yeah, spent all this time cooking this stuff, and then if like not eating it was so not like an option, like that's there,
Yeah.
yeah, the guilt there and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was some other stuff, involved later in my teen years with my dad after he got diagnosed with diabetes, and he really just did not adhere to he wouldn't check his blood sugar. I mean, that's why he died, like, it was a self-destructive thing, so there's baggage there as well, which is just, also just a great thing to have baggage around while you already have an eating disorder while that kinda thing is happening, so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that was cool. Um, One message that we got in the chat from the smallest deer, and Grand Chicken Lord was also talking about this. We need to talk about modern urban slash suburban design
yeah,
because our built world can really make or break communal ties. Um, Individual homes didn't used to have kitchens. Kitchens used to be a separate building that fed into the whole community, for
yeah,
example. So, like this idea that you cook your own meals just for yourself and your kids is part of what keeps women subjugated, um, makes life hell for disabled people, and on and on and on.
yeah. It
All of
is
the things we're talking about.
it is one of those things where our society is so much set up as this, like, people talk about individualism a lot, um like, and this kind of, well, I can do everything myself, and I'm only going to do things that benefit me and nobody else, and it's like, but I think that is almost a, like, thinking about it that way is almost like an individualistic way to think about it, because it's not this it's not a thing where like, I think a huge problem is this idea that we're supposed to do things that traditionally humans have done as a society, and we're supposed to
Mm,
do it all ourselves is wild. Like, and food is I think the biggest example of that, where it's just like, I genuinely believe we need to, like, it's one of those things that should just totally, it's wild that we all are expected to do this individually, when it's like, what, like everything else, it would be so much better as if we did it communally. If, like,
uh,
you could just go to a place, like, if, like, it's just more efficient to make meals in large batches and for lots of people. It's
so
crazy
much
to
less
let
waste.
yes, like, how much of food waste is there in this, in the world, but especially in our country, because of the way that, like, all this food has to, I mean, first of all, is grown all over the world, and we and needs to get shipped so often, like I saw this picture that was a fruit cup, and it was like grown in maybe Southeast Asia and packaged in South America or something like that, or
Mhm.
something of like
Yeah,
that, and then
gets
shipped to the
shipped
US.
around.
And it's like,
So
and
much
then,
fuel wasted.
right, and then it's all like, and then it's shipped to grocery stores, which is like, you know we could go into all of the ways that, like, food deserts are a huge problem, and not everybody has equal access
Mhm,
to grocery stores, and that all that stuff is all, like, determined by capitalism instead of need, and
mhm.
and it's all, and not to mention the way that, like price gouging exists. I mean, if y'all don't know, a huge reason that food prices are so expensive is literally price gouging. Like, we can see it, like, there was an fucking, uh it's known that egg manufacturers conspired to raise egg prices during the fucking pandemic,
Mhm,
and they still haven't come down, and nobody
mhm.
cares.
Yeah.
And then again, to the home, where it's like, well, what we all of us, like you were talking about, like suburban design, like, all of us have to so many of us have to fucking drive to the store and buy a bunch of it at once, because it's far away from you, and you have to drive to it, and then you're trying to manage, like, all these different ingredients for a long period of time, and it's just for a small amount of people, so you have to use all, you have to be a lot more careful about what things you buy, because it's like you have to use it all up, but you can only use a
Mhm.
little at a time because it's only for two fucking people. And
It's crazy. And then maybe if you have a kid, then you put that fruit cup in their lunchbox, and then they go to school, and maybe they don't even eat it, and it ends up in the garbage because of just like the vicissitudes of that day. You know, they had a cookie that day, like
Yeah.
at a class party. Like instead of like the food is harvested, and of course a few stops of logistics, but it goes to the school, and there's a cafe, like a
Right.
cafeteria, and kids just get free lunch at school without having to do all this arcane paperwork to prove they deserve a reduced or free lunch. Like you just
Yeah.
distribute food to people.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where like oh, who's going to be the garbage man in the communist utopia fucking question. A lot of people would want to be the cook. People like cooking. People like feeding people. It's very
Yeah.
fulfilling for a lot of people. Like just imagining like a community center where like a church is, or where a library is right now, where there's just food all day long, cafeteria style. Like, can you imagine? Like,
Yeah. And we make way too much food. The like world hunger. We don't like
it's manufactured. Yeah.
right. Like we make enough food already to solve world hunger. Like for sure.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep. It's it's crazy. Um Small Hand mentioned Food Not Bombs in Houston received something like 80 tickets for feeding. Oh, they've been ticketed by the police for feeding the homeless in front of the
Yeah.
library. Food Not Bombs, y'all, if you're looking for a way to get more involved in like especially more radical leftist kind of anarchist work, Food Not Bombs is such a great place to start. Like whether it's freeganing, liberating food waste from dumpsters, some chapters do that. Food distribution in local areas, like it's a good way to do shit that is this pretty radical. Like it's it's so disrupting to the powers that be that they fucking will ticket you for feeding homeless people. Like that's radical work. That's direct action. Like
Yeah,
that's badass shit.
I will never forget, and it didn't. It I mean, it happens. Stuff like this happens all the time, but in particular during the pandemic, I remember um, photos of you know 10 police officers in front of a dumpster, preventing people from stealing from the dumpster, which is
Mm-hmm.
totally wild, totally disgusting. And this shit is old. I mean, go back to fucking what is it? Um, Grapes of Wrath, where they talk about all that shit. All of the like food lying fallow because like the economy demands farmers like continue to grow food that they can't they can't sell, and how that
Mm-hmm.
still happens all the time, like the way that the entire agricultural industry in the United States is all like funded by the government because they want you know they need to have all this corn
The corn
grown.
lobby. Oh my god, that was one of my
Yeah.
first big libertarian issues. Was like end the corn lobby, man, and farm subsidies, man.
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean that shit is fucked up though. It's like
It's fuck. It is. It's super fucked up, and the amount of ecological destruction that goes into even just destroying land to make those farms when that's not.
right.
There are so many efficient ways to grow food. The fucking like
We figured this out 1,000 years ago.
wash corns and beans, the three sisters. Like this is like, there's
Yeah.
much more efficient ways to grow food. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And people love
infuriating.
that shit. I feel like if there's no other problem that if we all be if we became anarchists tomorrow, like I think there's a lot of things that maybe people wouldn't just do. Like I don't know. I don't know how we fucking figure out waste. I think that maybe there's people with garbage truck autism that are going to be really into that. I don't know if there's enough of them that it gets done on
We
its
need this is why
own.
we have to vaccine everybody, because so that we have more garbage truck autistics. Don't you know that's the big master plan? That's the
but
radical left.
uh, but like food'll happen. Food'll happen. I promise you. People fucking love to cook and they love to garden and shit.
Yes.
Ugh.
Oh my god. The If we could just slightly brainwash the cottagecore girlies, the trad wife girlies, into being trad wives for the commune.
Yes.
Something to think about.
Something to think about.
Something
Oh.
to think about. I did want to zoom back real quick because Gavin had a good comment. What is the thing with boomers who get diabetes and then don't check their blood sugar or take care of it and end up hurting slash killing themselves? There's so many people like that in my family. And it just makes me think of so many boomers I know who also won't use a cane if they need it to walk, won't use like any kind of mobility device.
Yeah,
Just like,
talk about a cultural force.
yeah, the like hatred of acknowledging disability, especially in that generation. That's a tangent, but I just wanted to highlight that real quick.
Yeah. But I think it is. I think it's part of our I think it's part of the culture that me and you exist in is this, and I think that unfortunately is less seems to me to be less so uh, singularly American. Not that it's exists everywhere, but this idea of like I don't know, like stoicism of like not taking care of yourself, and I don't know, maybe that's I think that there's an element of toxic masculinity there too, although it's not only
Hmm.
men, but
Yeah, it's stoicism. It's like this puritanism. It's ableism. Lots of things going on there. Oh, we got to show pets redeem also.
yes, let's finish. We have a few more minutes. Let's do that as we leave, so we
Perfect.
can get a couple more minutes. I'll see if I can find one of my animals too.
Yeah, yeah, we can do that as a little end cap. Good call. Yeah.
Um, do we have time for another for another one of these questions? I do like the idea of a part two. Um, oh, I wonder. We've done a couple questions. I can glance at some of the answers that some of the people that did submit ahead of time gave,
Oh yeah.
because we didn't do that. Um,
Yeah, good call.
what foods do you associate with home? Spaghetti pie, regular spaghetti, cornbread, and other southern staples like collard greens and black eyed peas, shrimp and
Mm,
grits, fried chicken tenders.
Southern.
I remember being like, spaghetti is a random funny one because I was like, I always think of spaghetti as a dish. I'm like, well, actually, it's just like pasta. Like, because you don't need doesn't need to be spaghetti noodles. Like, spaghetti are not noodles. Noodles, pasta are not noodles. This is random tangent of a thing I learned. Maybe I talked about it on the show at some point, but but spaghetti is noodle. It is noodles. Pasta isn't noodles. This shit
Wait, what?
fucked me up, man.
I mean,
Do you know what I'm talking about?
like, is a rigatoni a noodle? Like, is a
No,
fusilli a noodle?
pasta is not noodles. This shit, and
You're,
there's gonna be so many
I'm so confused
non-Americans in
right
here
now.
are gonna be like, yeah, duh. No, Italian pasta is made from fucking Italian
Isn't it just a
flour.
subgenre?
No, they're different. That's what I thought. That's what all Americans think is that pasta, like noodle, like there's noodles and then pasta is a kind of noodle. But it's not
Yeah,
true, apparently. It's like pasta is made from a specific kind of whatever the fucking flour is that makes
a type
Italian
of wheat, right?
yeah,
S-
whatever that wheat is. That's pasta. And
mhm.
noodles are not made with that. And so that's like Asian noodles and stuff, basically stuff that's not Italian is noodles. And so is not noodles. That fucked me up.
I I
It's
learned
totally
something.
random.
I'm still confused. So is a spaghetti a noodle?
No.
No, that's to me it is.
No.
What about Noodles and Company? Noodles and Company begs to disagree
That's
with
true
all
because they
noodles.
don't have all noodles because it's
Unless it's
not
the company. Is spaghetti the company? All right.
it's
A friend of
true.
noodle. I learned something at there's a friend of mine was in a show here in Chicago called A Taste of Show of Soul at the Black Ensemble Theater, and I learned that in a lot of like Black American culture, when you have a fish fry, spaghetti is a side.
Like spaghetti and pasta and
Red
meatballs,
sauce, red
maybe.
sauce. Yeah, I don't know about meatballs, but you'll get like a fish fry and then you'll have spaghetti with red sauce as your side.
That
Never
sounds
heard of that before.
great, honestly.
I
I
mean,
love that
sure,
idea of buying. I like that would be a good thing for myself because you could just buy this if you just buy sauce. Like that's just
it's easy to make, yeah, relatively, yeah.
wheat.
Like the way that mac and cheese is a side, you know?
Yeah.
So side.
Wheat fasuli is pasta. Yeah. So
Okay.
rice noodles are not pasta. So it's not a shape thing. So this is so irrelevant, but it fucking blew my goddamn mind. Uh this is some dumb website. So it's yeah, it's an ingredient thing. So uh oh, this is not actually a helpful article. But yeah, there's a certain what you said, wheat fasuli, I think, is pasta. If it uses that.
Okay. So soba noodles, even though they're wheat, they're not wheat fusilli.
Right.
Okay.
I
Soba with
I
tomato sauce. No. What is Pop-Tarts?
I don't think
What is
that's
that?
either. I think that's if
That's
we're gonna get in there, that's a like a
yeah. Now we're in the is a burrito a sandwich debate.
dude, uh, a noodle. I don't know what a noodle is. Then I guess that's true. They may share shapes at
Yeah.
time and have similar taste and coloring, but these two carbohydrate staples are actually quite different. National Pasta defines pasta as being dough made from durum wheat and water and stamped into different shapes.
Okay.
Aren't linked to a singular grain. From buckwheat noodles to rice noodles, yam noodles, and wheat flour noodles, there's no shortage of choices. Noodles can be crafted from everything from root vegetables to tapioca flour, mung bean starch. So I don't know what defines a noodle then, if they can be all these different things.
Yeah, what is noodle?
What the fuck is a noodle?
What is noodle?
Anything that is like pasta but not.
Yeah.
I just searched what noodle.
What?
What noodle?
We're doing okay.
A strip, ring, or two. Wait, fuck you, dictionary.com. This says
So that means a rigatoni is a noodle.
a strip, ring, or tube of pasta or similar dough.
Mm,
Does that mean
similar dough.
pasta is a noodle? Because
That seems like a very pasta-centric definition.
I thought pasta isn't noodle. That's the whole thing. So maybe it's just a noodle isn't a pasta. Like pasta's.
I
Wait.
mean, I would never call ramen a pasta. I would never call anything that isn't Italian a pasta. Would I call mac and cheese a pasta? No, but I could if I wanted to.
I
Oh
guess
no, somebody put
pastas are a noodle.
gnocchi in the chat.
So maybe I was confused. Pastas are noodles, but noodles. But wait. Now I'm so confused. Why did I bring this up? I thought I understood this, but now I'm confused.
I know less the more I hear.
I guess pasta is noodles.
I think it is.
See, I guess I'm wrong. But noodles aren't
Right.
pasta.
Yeah, that seems completely intuitive to me. That pasta is Italian genre
Of noodle.
of noodle, but you could call mac and cheese because it's basically just an Alfredo. Like you're kind of cheating. You're like, that's American pasta is mac and cheese. But yeah. There's a lot we're getting a lot of feedback in the chat that this is very American. This is a very
I
American
said that from the
conversation.
beginning. I said that from the beginning. So that's our culture. I think that
Yeah.
really brings it up is that we think spaghettis are noodles and that's part of our culture and you can't take that away from us. I think that's the reason I brought all this up.
Yes. Yeah, we're this really reveals just how culturally illiterate we are.
Hollow.
Yeah.
We uh um
What
let's
is
bring out our
noodle?
pets. Charlie heard me yelling and was worried I was upset, and so she has come here to to comfort
Oh,
me.
whoa, she looks so attentive right now. Oh my god.
Hi.
Dump truck could never empathize.
Yeah,
I'll be right back.
go get Jump Truck. Let's see the dump truck. Um so yeah, we're definitely going to have to talk more about this. So please I think there was a lot of good discussion in the chat that I think we should return to. I'm going to try to read through some of the
Sucking
chat.
his own dick. He's sucking his own dick. I
Really?
can't interrupt. Yes.
Can you bring the laptop?
There's too many cords, but
Yeah, there's too many cords. Take a
I'll get a photo. I'll get
Yeah,
a
get a
video.
photo. We got to get a photo of that dick sucking. How many holes does a noodle have? Yes, somebody clip that.
Finished.
He finished.
He
Did you
finished before
come?
I could get.
Oh, what a good boy.
He's got post nut clarity. Yeah, his dick gets so long when he's doing it. It's crazy. It's so fucked up.
Oh,
Look how smug he looks.
Charlie, say hi. Say hi. They're like the same color a little bit. Not quite.
Yeah. Oh, he just winked. He's so
Oh.
salacious right now.
Does he close his eyes on different, like not at the same
Yeah,
time?
yeah, he does separate eyes.
Like a lizard.
Yeah. He's very cold blooded.
I think that's a prey thing actually.
Yeah. Oh my god.
He's got
Oh,
those
he's
eyes.
purring now.
Is he? Oh, he wanted a postcoital cuddle.
Oh my god. Oh my god, he's vibrating. Oh, baby. Putting it against the mic. By it, I mean him.
Yeah, I don't think we can hear it, unfortunately.
That's too bad. Know that he's vibrating.
Oh, what an extraordinarily good boy.
That's very special. Does he enjoy being watched? He likes watching. Like we had a friend over yesterday, and he just sat on the couch with them, just staring at them, and like climbing all over them. Like for a prey animal, he goes towards anything new or unfamiliar and like crawls on it, which seems like not a good instinct. But
Oh, big stretch, big stretch. Oh, good, I caught that.
oh, nice.
Big
Oh,
stretch, Charlie.
oh.
But yeah, we're gonna have to. I was saying while you're gone, we'll have to do part two. Um, uh,
Yeah.
we got through like none of the questions because we talked about the rest of the discussion so much.
But it was all so great.
It was really great. So I'm gonna try and read through some of the chat. If you'd like to answer answer the questions with us, and if you have any, I feel like there's a better way to have this conversation, but I don't know what it is. So if you have a suggestion for that, but it's such a good conversation. I'm so into it.
Yeah. I think the nature of it is just like so many people have so many good things to share that like I think like this going question by question has been good and letting
Yeah.
people share in the chat as well as looking what people submit ahead of time. And it's just we just it's pearls before swine, you know. And baby, I'm oinking like there's just a lot like we just have an abundance of like cool things to talk about, and that
Yep.
means we won't get to highlight all of it, but it's still really
The
worth.
thing I think I'd really like to talk about next time, in addition to answering these questions, is like how to create culture. And I think that really gets what it's down to is a lot of the discussion that you were having is about how hollow American white like this kind of culture that cultural thing that we grew up in is kind of hollow and vapid because the things that were there we want to reject and also all this I'm repeating myself but like
Yeah.
how do we find things that are good you know how do we find connect with if we do have things we can connect with how to connect with those well and or how do we create stuff so I'd love to hear from people how I don't know if they have good answers for how they do that.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah, I think that could be a good pivot for part two, like both answering these questions descriptively and also thinking and talking even more about how do we establish more of these new traditions. Hearing about people who have already done things to establish new community ties and traditions has owned. So
Yeah.
thank you for people who shared that stuff.
Do we need to create a holiday? Do we need to make a Festivus
Yes,
for our little
Orange
group?
Day.
Uh
Oh my god, that would be great.
all right. Um all right. Oh man, my connection is really bad. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it just got chunky for me too.
Um oh man, yeah. Oh, I bet there's something happening storm-wise. So I hope that just started. Um I'm not sure if you guys can hear me anymore.
It looks like it's stabled out a little bit.
Okay, good. Good, good, good.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, love all the answers. Love more. Let's
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. This was a really good conversation. Um, really lovely.
yeah, let's raid before I lose connection with you guys.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyone else who's in the Midwest,
Stay warm.
stay safe.
We're about to have a big cold snap this weekend, so
Let's go to Vectroid. Have you ever heard are you familiar with Macintosh Plus?
no, I am not.
Macintosh Plus is the a musician who did basically the first I forget what it's called. I think it's got like Japanese characters in it. It's the first like big uh um vaporwave album that came out.
Oh,
And so she's also a streamer now and does fun streamy stuff. Say hi for us.
yes.
And again, in the Discord, to our email, Dr. Devon Price streaming in either of our Tumblr Ask boxes, wherever you're
Yeah.
comfortable. Send us your answers, or just do them for yourself and think about them.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for being here, everyone. This one was really lovely. And
Yes.
we'll continue this soon.